to thank Senators Britt and Budd for leading this important bipartisan effort that every single Senate Republican supports, and we picked up a few Democrats as well. And I also want to thank Congressman Collins for his leadership in getting this through the House of Representatives with a big bipartisan vote. I discovered I had the privilege of serving with his dad many years ago, a big admirer of his, and so thank you for your leadership. This is something that needs to be addressed. Laken Riley's horrific murder should have never happened. She should still be with us today, and if she was, as Senator Britt pointed out, she'd be turning 23 tomorrow. The individual responsible was arrested not once but twice, but was released by authorities in New York before an ICE detention order could be issued. This legislation is designed to make sure that that never happens again. The act is also designed to hold federal law enforcement officials accountable if they fail to detain criminals as the law requires, which is a troubling trend that we see across the country today. Now, as it goes to the process, I'm actually very pleased to see that we've got a number of our Democrat colleagues who have changed their tune on this and have allowed us to debate the bill. And quite frankly, I would say that's overdue. We should have passed this last year to ensure that this kind of tragedy never happens again. So allowing us to debate the bill is the bare minimum. But 60 votes on the front end, which is what we saw today, doesn't necessarily guarantee that they will provide the necessary votes on the back end. As the Senate considers this bill, we're going to get a sense early on whether Democrats are serious about working with us to prevent tragedies like this, or if they simply want to play politics with the issue. And let me just say, this is not a comprehensive immigration bill. This isn't even a border bill. It's not comprehensive in either sense. If senators have good faith ideas about how to improve the bill, great. But we are in the lawmaking business here, and we are not going to entertain political showmanship and unrelated efforts that stand in the way of preventing tragedies like this from happening again in the future. So again, thanks to Senator Britt for and her great leadership on this, and for Senator Budd and the work that they've done to ensure that this gets considered in the Senate, and I hope ultimately it gets passed, and that we do what we should have done a long time ago to prevent tragedies like this from happening. Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the first bill that a new majority considers is an indication of its priorities. The American people are rightly concerned about the illegal immigration crisis in this country, and they sent a clear message in November that they want to see it addressed. And that is why the Republican majorities in the House and the Senate have made it our first order of business to take up the Laken Riley Act. This bill is a small but critical step toward resolving the Biden border crisis, the first of many, I might add. Mr. President, the Laken Riley Act is not a complicated bill. It says that an illegal immigrant involved in a theft-related crime must be detained. That means if someone who is in the country illegally, in other words, who has already broken our laws, commits a robbery, he or she will be detained. If this bill had already been law, the illegal immigrant who killed Laken Riley would not have been on the streets the day that he murdered her. When he was cited for shoplifting less than 5 months before that day, he would have been detained, and Laken Riley might still be alive today. That's what we're trying to do here, is prevent another tragedy. Unfortunately, it seems that even a simple and straightforward bill to detain criminal illegal immigrants is too much for some on the left. Some of our Democrat colleagues have spent the week searching for a reason, any reason, to justify voting against this bill. For starters, we've heard that this bill would cover too many illegal immigrants. Well, Mr. President, the admission that there are too many individuals on our streets who have committed a crime after coming into the country illegally is an argument for this bill, not against it. We've also heard that Immigration and Customs Enforcement lacks the detention capacity for the number of individuals that this bill will require to be detained. Well, if resources are scarce, Mr. President, the answer is to provide those resources. The answer is not to let criminals continue to walk our streets. Republicans believe that keeping illegal aliens off our streets is a good investment. And we are currently working on a bill that will provide ICE with additional agents and additional detention capacity. Mr. President, we've also been told that this bill will overwhelm ICE such that there won't be enough space to detain violent criminals. Once again, this is not an argument against the bill. It's an argument for giving ICE more resources and for quickly deporting criminals. Mr. President, these arguments say a lot more about Democrats' unwillingness to crack down on illegal immigration than they say about this bill. Look at the vote that we took on Wednesday. We adopted Senator Cornyn's amendment to require illegal immigrants who assault a police officer to be detained. Staggeringly, under current law, this is not the case. But two days ago, 25 of our Democrat colleagues could not even bring themselves to support detaining an illegal immigrant who assaults a police officer. That's right. More than half of the Democrats in the United States Senate apparently don't believe we should have to detain these individuals. I think that's out of step with the American people. For sure it's out of step with the American people. Mr. President, the American people want to see an end to open borders and the chaos that they have brought to communities around the country. Communities like Athens, Georgia, where Laken Riley was murdered last February. Laken Riley's death was a tragedy, and it was preventable. And the bill we're considering today may prevent a similar tragedy from affecting another family. Laken's loved ones have had to suffer the heartbreak of losing their daughter, their sister, their friend, a bright light in their lives. But her mother and stepfather said of this bill, and I quote, "There's no greater gift that could be given to her and our country than to continue her legacy by saving lives through this bill," end quote. Saving lives, Mr. President. That's what this is about. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Majority Leader?
Mr. President, Senate quorum call?
It is not.
Mr. President, I was listening to the chair of the Intelligence Committee just a moment ago talking about this nominee, and I was curious. I asked the Senator from Arkansas, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, what was the vote coming out of committee for Mr. Radcliffe?
The vote was 14-3.
Okay, so 14-3 coming out of the committee. And we've now wasted a whole day where we could have been acting on that nomination. And so really, I think the question before the House is, do we want to vote on these folks on Tuesday or vote on them on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? Because that's what we're going to do. This can be easy or this can be hard. This is a nominee that came out of the Intelligence Committee 14-3. It is a bipartisan nomination to the Central Intelligence Agency. This is about America's national security interests. And we're stalling. So that's not going to happen. We're going to file cloture on them. You can force us to staying around here, and we can vote on these things Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But we're going to vote on them. And this one shouldn't be hard, folks. I understand there are some that are going to draw some opposition from the other side of the aisle. But Democrats and Republicans, in a very big bipartisan fashion, agree that he is very qualified for this job, that is an important job to America's national security interests, and frankly, I believe we ought to fill it as soon as we possibly can. So it's going to be a big vote here on the floor. Everything we're doing right now is just stalling. And I don't know what that accomplishes for you, but we're going to be here voting on him. So I would, with that, Mr. President, move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 1. President, it didn't take long. Democrats have already begun stalling President Trump's nominees. And it doesn't seem to matter who it is. Right now, the senator from Connecticut is holding up a vote on John Radcliffe, who was nominated for director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Intelligence Committee favorably reported Mr. Radcliffe's nomination on a bipartisan vote, 14-3. In a joint statement with Chairman Cotton, the Democrat vice chair of the Intelligence Committee said this, and I quote, "Our world is far too dangerous for any delay in having a Senate-confirmed leader in charge of the CIA. We urge expeditious consideration of this important nomination," end quote. Now, Mr. President, that again is from the Democrat vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee urging, and I quote again, "expeditious consideration of this important nomination," end quote. Now, Mr. President, this is the director of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, a key national security position. Mr. Radcliffe is a qualified nominee. He was Director of National Intelligence in the first Trump administration, the quarterback for all 18 elements of the intelligence community. In the House of Representatives, he served on the Intelligence Committee, and he was chairman of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee on the Homeland Security Committee. He's been vetted by the Intelligence Committee, and he'll likely receive bipartisan support on the floor, as he did in the committee. Mr. President, the senator from Connecticut wants to unnecessarily delay this vote. He says senators need time for a full, real debate. Well, where are they? Why are we not debating? Nothing's been stopping any of our Democrat colleagues from coming down to the floor to debate and make any concerns that they have known to the Senate and to the American people. At least one senator has already taken advantage of that opportunity. The senator from Connecticut also says that senators need more time to review the nominee's record. Well, Mr. President, Mr. Radcliffe's nomination was announced 2 months ago. That long enough? His hearing was a week ago. There's been plenty of time to review his record. It's time to vote. This is just an unnecessary delay that makes this country less safe. Mr. President, Democrats and Republicans agree that this is an important job. We agree that Mr. Radcliffe is qualified. But a handful of Democrats want to play politics with this nominee. And I have to say, I honestly don't know what that accomplishes for them. But I do know this. It makes this country less safe. Mr. President, it's time to vote. Mr. President, I think we all remember the situation just a few short months ago in the lead up to the election. Democrat senators and Senate candidates were declaring their commitment to eliminating the filibuster or creating carve-outs that would render it meaningless. The Democrat leader himself made it very clear that the days of the filibuster were numbered, telling a crowd at the Democrat National Convention that his party would be changing the rules to pass the Democrats' federal takeover of elections. The filibuster, it seemed, was on its way out. Fast forward to yesterday, Mr. President. Yesterday, it seems, there was a sudden change of heart, because yesterday every Senate Democrat, the Democrat leader, new Democrat senators, long-serving Democrat senators who had expressed their desire to get rid of the filibuster, joined together and filibustered a bill. That's right. Every Democrat senator participated in a filibuster of yesterday's legislation. Now, Mr. President, I'll leave aside the disturbing fact that Democrats chose to unite to block a bill to protect living, breathing, newborn children born alive after an attempted abortion. What I want to talk about today is Democrats' apparent belief that there should be one rule for Democrats and another rule for everyone else. Back in 2017, during President Trump's first term, when Republicans controlled the Senate, 32 Senate Democrats, many of whom I might add are still serving today, joined a letter to Senate leadership asking for preservation of the legislative filibuster. And then Democrats took power. And all of a sudden, Democrats started to find the legislative filibuster a major inconvenience. They wanted to pass highly partisan legislation, like their federal takeover of elections, and they discovered the filibuster was getting in the way. Now, Republicans are in power again, and it seems Democrats are back to supporting the filibuster. And the only thing I can gather from that, Mr. President, is that Democrats think they should be free to pass any legislation they choose when they're in power, but the Republicans should not. That the rules should apply when they serve the aims of the Democrat Party, and that the rules should be abolished whenever they interfere with Democrats' far-left agenda. In short, that one party, the Democrat Party, should be making the decisions in this country. That's not a very democratic attitude, Mr. President. It also betrays an elitism, a disdain for half of the electorate that perhaps had something to do with Democrats' electoral defeat in November. Now, Mr. President, there's no doubt that the filibuster can sometimes be frustrating. I'm frustrated that we couldn't pass legislation yesterday to uphold basic human decency by requiring that babies born alive after an attempted abortion receive appropriate medical care. But the filibuster serves a crucial purpose. The founders intended the Senate to be a counterbalance to the House. It was designed to be a more stable, thoughtful, more deliberative legislative body to check ill-considered or intemperate legislation or tyranny by the majority. And as time has gone on, the legislative filibuster is the Senate rule that has had perhaps the greatest impact in preserving the founders' vision of the Senate. The filibuster acts as a check on imprudent or ill-considered legislation. It forces discussion and compromise. And critically, it ensures that Americans whose party is not in power also have a voice in Congress. Preserving the filibuster is crucial to preserving the Senate's checks and balances role in our system of government. And Mr. President, I expect the Democrats will continue to display our renewed enthusiasm for the filibuster during this Congress. And while I may strongly disagree with their choice of when to use it, I will continue to defend their right to do so. Keeping the Senate, and ensuring it continues to fill the role envisioned for it by the founders is more important than temporary political gain. And I hope that when the day comes that Democrats retake the Senate, their time in the minority will have reminded them of the crucial role the filibuster plays, and that they will carry their newfound enthusiasm for the filibuster with them when they again find themselves in our shoes. Mr. President.
Good afternoon. Today finds the Democrats in disarray, and we're going to find out here real soon whether that disarray extends to abandoning the defense of Israel and, frankly, the defense of America when it comes to an unlawful court that the United States and Israel are not members of. We know for sure in the past that the International Criminal Court has targeted American soldiers, and if we don't take a stand against that now, they will do it again. And so I want to thank Senators Risch and Cotton for their leadership on this issue. You'll hear from them more about that in just a moment. The other issue, as we all know, on the floor these days is nominations. And as you all know, the Democrats made a big deal and blocked the nomination of John Radcliffe to CIA last week. Ultimately, he ended up getting 74 votes on the floor, and that's going to be the case. I mean, they can block these votes, but these folks, we're going to continue to press on and get them confirmed, and they can do this the hard way or the easy way. If they want to continue to obstruct and delay, we're going to continue to grind and grind and grind, and we'll do that through the weekend if necessary. So I'm hopeful, particularly on these noms that we know have broad bipartisan support that have come out of the committees with big margins, that they allow the President to get his people into place so that he can implement his agenda. And we will work with him to make sure that that happens. And so I'm going to flip it now to our colleague, Senator Risch.
Mr. President, last week the Washington Examiner published an article highlighting Democrats' third filibuster of this new Congress. That's right. You heard it. Third. The party that mere months ago, literally, was gleefully making plans to destroy the filibuster is now using the filibuster left and right. But as we know, for Democrats, it's one rule for me, another for thee. And as the Washington Examiner piece made clear, some Democrats are even embracing their hypocrisy. You use the rules that exist, one Democrat said. I might advocate for a higher speed limit, but I still observe the speed limit until it's changed. Well, okay, Mr. President, but are Democrats still crusading to abolish the filibuster while Republicans are in charge? The answer is, of course not. Because abolishing the filibuster isn't about principle for Democrats. It's about political advantage. So Democrats will unashamedly support different rules depending on who's in charge. Now, Mr. President, I could spend my whole time today talking about Democrats' rank hypocrisy when it comes to the filibuster. But I also like to talk about the content of the bills that they filibustered and what that says about the Democrat Party. Mr. President, in a few short weeks of this new Congress, Democrats have filibustered 3 bills. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, otherwise known as the ICC Sanctions Bill, and the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act was a simple bill. It simply stated that a baby born alive after an attempted abortion must be given the same protection and medical care that any other newborn baby would be given. That's it. You would assume such a bill would be entirely uncontroversial. Democrats may not believe in protecting unborn human beings, but surely they still believe in protecting born human beings. But as it turns out, protecting born human beings, at least when they're born alive after an abortion, is not on the Democrats' priority list. In fact, every Democrat in the Senate, every Democrat, without exception, voted against this bill. And I'm afraid the sad truth, Mr. President, is that Democrats are so deeply concerned with preserving the supposed right to kill unborn babies, they couldn't bring themselves to protect born babies, for fear that it would eventually lead to recognizing the humanity of the unborn. And all I can say, Mr. President, is that a party that is so committed to killing unborn babies that it can't vote to protect born babies is nothing short of morally bankrupt. So that was the first bill that Democrats filibustered. The next was the ICC sanctions bill, and that was another straightforward bill, Mr. President. It would have sanctioned foreign individuals who are involved in international criminal court efforts to investigate, arrest, or prosecute U.S. citizens or citizens of U.S. allies that are not party to the ICC, or the International Criminal Court. The bill was a response to the ICC's decision to pursue warrants for Israeli officials. And it was also designed to protect Americans, and American soldiers in particular, who've been targeted by the ICC in the past. But once again, Senate Democrats, with one lone exception, found themselves incapable of taking a stand. Now, I'm not sure if it was anti-Israel animus, or if they were afraid of antagonizing the anti-Israel wing of their party, or if they're simply too beholden to big tech, which lodged some tenuous concerns about this legislation. But for whatever reason, Democrats filibustered the bill. And in doing so, they not only failed to rebuke the ICC for its illegitimate targeting of Israeli leaders, but they failed to protect U.S. citizens. Mr. President, the third bill the Democrats filibustered, and filibustered just this past week, I might add, was the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. This legislation was designed to restore the original intent of Title IX, which is giving women equal opportunities in education, by ensuring that women and girls only, are permitted to play in women's sports at federally funded educational institutions. The bill, of course, is a response to the growing problem of women's sports being invaded by biological males. And I want to quote for you something from an August 2024, this is United Nations report, Just last August, report from the United Nations on violence against women and girls, and it noted, and I quote, "The replacement of the female sports category with a mixed-sex category has resulted in an increasing number of female athletes losing opportunities, including medals, when competing against males. According to information received by March 30th of 2024, over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports," end quote. Over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports. That a quote, Mr. President, out of the United Nations report on violence against women and girls coming in August of last year. Mr. President, it's not even remotely fair. Girls should not be having to compete in races that are stacked against them. Women deserve their own athletic opportunities, opportunities that are not taken away from them by biological males who have their own spaces in which to compete. But try explaining that to Democrats. Democrats like to portray themselves as leading the charge on women's issues. But not one Democrat, not one, could bring himself or herself to vote in support of women and girls. Biological males, not women, got Democrat support last Monday. Well, apparently, Democrats' commitment to equal opportunity for women only runs so deep and quickly falls by the wayside when the left demands adherence to some new ideology. Mr. President, the outcome of the 2024 presidential election was partially a rebuke of far-left dogmas and ideologies. But apparently, Democrats have learned nothing from that electoral rebuke. Today, Mr. President, the supposed party of the little guy, the underdog, the disadvantaged, has become a party willing to sacrifice born human beings to abortion extremism and equality for women and girls on the altar of transgender ideology. I have to say, Mr. President, it is no wonder that the American people rejected them in November of 2024. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum. Mr. President, we recently completed a 10-week session, the Senate's longest in-session stretch in 15 years. It was a very busy 10 weeks filled with substantial results. We confirmed nearly the President's entire cabinet, the fastest pace since the administration of George W. Bush. We laid the groundwork for a transformational investment in border security and national defense. We continued to develop legislation to extend the tax relief we put in place for American families in President Trump's first term. We passed legislation to ensure that illegal aliens arrested for various crimes are detained instead of being returned to America's streets. We considered other bills that Democrats blocked, bills to achieve such common sense goals as protecting Americans and our allies from illegitimate targeting by the International Criminal Court and ensuring that athletic opportunities for women and girls are not taken away from them by biological males. And in our final week of session, we passed the Halt Fentanyl Act, legislation to give law enforcement a critical tool to go after the people trafficking fentanyl in our country. We also passed legislation to fund the government by a narrow margin. 10 Democrats voted to allow us to proceed to the bill and fund the government. The rest preferred to filibuster the bill and shut down the government. It was a double dose of Democrat hypocrisy. Democrats who had campaigned to abolish the filibuster enthusiastically embraced it now that it served their purposes. And Democrats who had decried the evils of government shutdowns now embraced shutting down the government. One senator, for example, who just last March called shutdowns, and I quote, as devastating as they are stupid, end quote, voted for a shutdown 10 days ago. Another Democrat who last February noted that, and I quote again, even a partial shutdown could disrupt supply chains, hurt small businesses, risk travel delays, and increase food prices for millions of Americans, end quote. That Democrat also voted to shut down the government. Democrats are changing their position so abruptly, it could give you whiplash. The only thing that doesn't look likely to change is Democrats' willingness to change their principles when it suits their political purposes. Mr. President, a new period of session begins today, and I hope the Democrats will manage to move past the fact that they weren't able to shut down the government. But whether they accept their defeat or decide to throw a tantrum about it, we're going to continue to do the job that we were elected and sent here to do. In the next 3 weeks, we'll continue to build out the President's administration by voting on more of his nominees. With the Cabinet almost entirely confirmed, we'll be turning to undersecretaries and deputy secretaries as well as ambassadors. And like the White House, this work period will be focused on rolling back burdensome government regulations, in our case through the Congressional Review Act resolutions. This week, we'll send the President Senator Cruz's resolution to roll back the Biden administration's digital asset broker rule, which puts at risk the privacy and security of tens of millions of Americans who trade digital assets. We'll also look to take up Senator Tim Scott's overdraft fee resolution, overturning a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rule that threatens access to credit for individuals and small businesses. And we will take up a number of other CR resolutions this work period. Finally, Mr. President, as I said, we have been hard at work on legislation to extend the tax relief we passed during President Trump's first term and to make a transformational investment in our border and national security. And those efforts will accelerate over the next 3 weeks. Confirming nominations, lifting burdensome regulations, laying the groundwork for tax and border security legislation. Mr. President, I look forward to another busy work period ahead. And Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President, in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provision of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding.
Objections heard. The item will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, before I begin, I want to mention longtime Supreme Court Justice David Souter, who died on Thursday. My thoughts and prayers are with his family and loved ones. I also want to mention Cardinal Robert Prevost, who on Thursday became Pope Leo XIV. And I want to extend my congratulations on his election and my prayers for his service. I know that his election is particularly moving for American Catholics, who for the first time in history will be led by an American-born Pope. I'm very happy for them, and I look forward to seeing what this son of the Midwest brings to the Catholic Church and to the world. Mr. President, on Thursday afternoon, Democrats abruptly ended extensive bipartisan work on the Genius Act and filibustered the Senate's attempt to move this bill. Democrats, I should say, who had voted for the bill in committee, inexplicably chose to vote against it here on the Senate floor. Mr. President, that's pretty difficult to understand. Providing a regulatory framework for stablecoins is a bipartisan issue. The bill is the product of a bipartisan negotiation. And the vote in the Banking Committee was definitely bipartisan, which leads you to wonder, of course, if this was really about the bill at all, or if this was about wanting to deny President Trump, or Republicans more generally, a legislative victory, which might be nice for Democrats, but leaves stablecoin issuers and Americans who use stablecoins in the same difficult spot that they're currently in. But unfortunately, it's pretty clear that obstructing, not legislating, is the Democrats' priority right now. Mr. President, until Democrats come to their senses and allow us to proceed to the Genius Act, we're going to turn to nominations, another area where, unfortunately, Democrats have made obstruction the name of the game. I certainly understand that Democrats are not going to support all the president's nominees. That's their prerogative as senators. But the way that they are drawing out this process on even non-controversial nominations is serving no one. 57 out of the 58 of the president's civilian nominees have required cloture votes, an unprecedented number for recent administrations. And of those 57 nominees, 17 received 60 or more votes in support on their final confirmation vote. In other words, support from a number of Democrats as well as Republicans. And yet, Democrats dragged out those nominations in the same way they dragged out the nominations of individuals that they universally opposed. Not a single one of President Trump's civilian nominees has been confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Again, something entirely unprecedented in recent years. No other president since at least 1977 has failed to have civilian nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote at this point of his administration, except for President Trump in his first term in office. And as I said, this is serving no one, Mr. President. Nor is this going to prevent the President's nominees from getting confirmed. Democrats can drag out nominations all they want, but we're going to fill out the President's administration and ensure that his nominees get into place so that they can do the job and that he can do the job that he was elected to do. I'd like to do this the easy way and confirm non-controversial nominees expeditiously, in batches, for example, and maybe even by unanimous consent. That would give us more time to legislate and give members more time to spend in their states. But if we have to do this the hard way, we will. We're going to get the President's team in place. So I guess, Mr. President, Democrats have some decisions to make. I really hope, that they'll come back to the table on the Genius Act. And I hope that they will cease their pointless obstruction of bipartisan nominees. But I guess we'll have to see. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Going? What the Democrats said. No, you don't have to tell me. I think I know what they said. This week, we should be on the Genius bill, which is the stablecoin bill. As most of you know, we had a vote to motion, a cloture on the motion to proceed last week, which every single Democrat voted against, in spite of the fact that there were 5 Democrats who voted for that exact legislation when it came out of the Senate Banking Committee. So the Democrats have now found newfound admiration for the Senate filibuster. The junior senator from Arizona was in Pennsylvania over the weekend. And by the way, he was one of the Senate Democrats who voted for the Genius bill when it came out of the Senate Banking Committee. And he was out there just crowing about the fact that the Senate Democrats had used the filibuster now 4 times. They stopped 4 bills via the filibuster. And so pretty remarkable, honestly, that the Democrats now are in love with the Senate filibuster. And given the fact that every single Senate Democrat either voted for or campaigned in favor, or I should say, in favor of getting rid of the filibuster. So it's a pretty remarkable turnaround. Not that hypocrisy is something that's new in this town, but this seems to take it to a whole new level. So, and since we're not doing that, we're going to move forward on nominations and confirm a lot of President Trump's nominees. That's the process that we've undertaken in the lieu of having the Genius bill available for consideration on the floor. And I would point out, with respect to that subject, that this is the first president that hasn't had a nominee that has been approved by voice vote or unanimous consent at this point in a Senate, going back, if you can believe this, to the Ford administration. So the Democrats have opted and chosen obstruction, they've chosen blocking, they've chosen delay as their means of kind of trying to manage the institution these days. But we're going to, in spite of that, continue to press forward. We're going to continue to move the Republican agenda, which starts with getting the President's nominees into place as quickly as possible. So that is the agenda for this week. And at some point, hopefully, the Democrats will come back to the table on the Genius bill, and we'll get to a point where we can put it back on the floor. Unfortunately, we didn't have that opportunity this week because they chose to filibuster it last.
Suspended. Without objection.
Mr. President, I know that August is approaching, but we still have some serious work to do here in Washington. We need to make further progress on appropriations. And we have a number of President Trump's nominations to get through. Mr. President, despite a historic level of obstruction from Democrats, Senate Republicans have been maintaining a brisk pace on confirming President Trump's nominees. We've confirmed 107 civilian nominees, nearly doubling the pace in President Trump's first administration at this point. And we've done it with good old-fashioned hard work. Thanks in substantial part to our commitment to getting President Trump's team in place, the Senate has taken 437 votes so far this year, which is more than in any Congress at this point in the last 35-plus years. In fact, we've taken more votes in 2025 already in less than 7 months than the Senate has taken in a full 12 months for 32 of the past 36 years. So we've kept up a very intense pace. But there are a number of nominees still waiting for confirmation, and we're going to get through a lot more of them soon. And so we can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mr. President, and that's really up to the Senate Democrats. As I said, we've confirmed President Trump's civilian nominees at nearly double the pace of his first administration so far, through a lot of hours spent here in the Senate, but we would have a lot more nominees confirmed at this point if Democrats hadn't decided to drag out every nomination. Democrats have not allowed a single civilian Trump nominee to pass by unanimous consent or voice vote, even when Democrats have ultimately ended up supporting the nomination in significant numbers. I refer to this, Mr. President, as a historic level of obstruction, and I mean it. President Trump is the only president on record to not have a single one of his civilian nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote at this point in his presidency. The only president on record. Now, just to offer a point of comparison here, by this point in his presidency, President Biden had 44 civilian nominees confirmed by voice vote. President Trump hasn't had one. 44 for Biden, 0 for President Trump. And so when I say this is a historic level of obstruction from Democrats, I mean it. That's not a Republican talking point. It's just a fact. Democrats haven't offered a shred of courtesy to President Trump, to the voters who elected him, or the people who have stepped up to serve our country in his administration. And so the ball is in Democrats' court, Mr. President. They can continue to drag out the process on even the most uncontroversial nominees, and we can spend a lot more hours with each other in the Senate chamber. Or they can rein in their reflexive anti-Trump sentiment and allow some of his rank-and-file nominees to proceed by unanimous consent or voice vote, just as Republicans did when the roles were reversed. And I'd remind my colleagues about the dangerous and ugly precedent that they're setting here. But the choice is theirs. But whether it's the slow way or the fast way, we're getting President Trump's nominees confirmed. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you all know, we are spending a good amount of our time and energy here in the Senate on nominations these days. And we've seen an unprecedented level of obstruction and delay and blocking from Democrats. And as a consequence of that, we've had to kind of grind through, and that's what we're going to keep doing. If you look at just the historical precedent with regard to noms, we have never seen in history anything like what the Democrats are now doing. As of this date, back in 2021, Joe Biden had gotten 46 nominees confirmed either by voice vote or unanimous consent. Donald Trump has 0. Not a single one. confirmed by voice or unanimous consent. And further, the Democrats are making it hard even on bipartisan nominees that sometimes will get 60 votes plus on the floor, one even up to 83 votes on the floor. So even the bipartisan noms are being blocked and delayed, so much so that the Democrats have been forcing me, when I file cloture just to get a nominee considered on the floor, to go in and out of executive and legislative session. So these are just dilatory tactics designed to block and obstruct the president and his agenda. And the sad reality is that there are a lot of these people who fill important positions in our government who need to be able to be confirmed to get there so they can do their jobs. And that's the way of the American people. That's what they voted for. They voted for this president, and he has not had an opportunity to get the people that he wants to have man his administration get there to do their job. So this has got to stop. And clearly the Democrats are starting something and creating a precedent that is going to come back to haunt them. This is really bad. This is a bad practice on their part, because as you all know, what goes around comes around here. And I think regrettably for the Democrats, they're going to rue the day if they keep this practice up. So I am hoping that they will work with us, come to their senses in the next few days here to try and put together a package of nominees. There are a whole bunch of bipartisan nominees that are out there that are available for consideration right now. But this simply is, again, I've said it before, but it is. It's Trump derangement syndrome on steroids with the Senate Democrats. There are Senate Democrats who actually do want to work on getting some noms through the process, but their leadership is blocking that. And unfortunately, here in the Senate, at least on the Democrat side of the aisle, it is the tail wagging the dog. It is the far left of their caucus that is preventing even good government people who are bipartisan, from getting confirmed. So that's got to change, and if it doesn't, we're going to be here a while. So with that, we'll try and answer questions.
We know what Russ Vought had said about a less bipartisan appropriations process. Will you ultimately be looking to the president himself about what he wants in government funding, and do you think he would be willing to, give the Democrats some breaks to give them some opportunity to get onto whatever form of a spending bill take shape in September?
I think it's in everybody's interest to avoid a government shutdown at the end of September, which, as you all know, is when our fiscal year ends. And obviously, in order for that to happen, it's going to take some cooperation from Democrats. So I think the president is prepared to deal, to negotiate. He's proven that in the past. And obviously, we have bills on the floor right now, or a bill on the floor, which we're trying to convert into bills, to make it a package of bills to consider to keep the appropriations process moving forward. And obviously, we are all very concerned on our side of the aisle in finding ways to make our country more fiscally sustainable and to find savings within the appropriations process and the other areas of government funding that fall under the mandatory side of the budget. But we very much want to see restraint in spending so that we can start dealing with the debt and the deficits. And I think the best way, at least right now, to do that is to have a normal appropriations process. And a number of my colleagues are on that committee and have been working aggressively to try and get bills ready for consideration on the floor. And I just hope now that we can get a path forward to do that. If at the end of the fiscal year the Democrats use any other suggestion made by anybody in the administration as a cover for not doing appropriations bills, or worse yet, as a cover for trying to shut the government down, that is an argument that's not going to be sustainable. And so if we end up with a Schumer shutdown at the end of the year, the Democrats are going to own that. In the meantime, we're going to do everything we can to try and move the appropriations process forward, which is why we called up and put on the floor the Milcon VA appropriations bill last week.
How are you going to handle a CR at the end of September? Will you do what you did in March, basically take a House-passed package, bring it to the floor, or would you enter a four corners negotiation ahead of time?
Well, to be determined. I think a lot of that depends on how cooperative the Democrats are in trying to get the appropriations process moving forward. Obviously, I would say all options are on the table when it comes to funding the government. But what I can tell you is we are going to look for ways to keep the government funded and open and operating. And what we hear, at least rhetorically, coming out of the Democrats right now is they have a very different view of the world. And they're already talking openly about a shutdown. And I think the politics on their side of the aisle right now is such that, as I said, the far left, the wing of their party in the Senate, is calling the shots. And I don't think that's in anybody's best interest. So I'm not taking any options off the table, but what I will tell you today is that as we look at this week and then the subsequent week coming in September, I intend to use those weeks to try and get appropriation bills done so that when we get to that year-end conversation, we're prepared to have hopefully a substantive conversation about what the best way is to fund the government.
Thank you so much, sir. You have a situation now where the president says the images coming out of Gaza are bad. He's thinking about opening food centers there. You have a Republican, Marjorie Taylor Greene, calling it a genocide. You have American support for Benjamin Netanyahu slipping. What do you say?
Well, I think that I share the president's view. I think that the humanitarian thing, obviously, when you see people hurting in a need like that, is to want to help meet that need and alleviate that pain. And so I think our government and I think other governments around the world, other nations, are very interested in doing what they can to make sure that people who, through no fault of their own, are being harmed by what's happening there. But you got to understand, too, that when you've got a terrorist group like Hamas operating in that region, they're going to intercept and divert a lot of that food aid that's going in there. And I think that's the challenge that the Israelis have, that's the challenge that we have and other nations around the world who are trying to step in and help. But I think all of us want to see, obviously, a peaceful solution there that gets the hostages freed and ends the reign and rule of Hamas in the region. But in the meantime, do everything we can to ease the pain and the hunger that's afflicting so many of the people in that region of the world.
Another issue you spoke about this morning was agriculture and the safety net provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill. We still don't have a 5-year farm bill. Given everything else going on here, calendar this fall, what do you see as the prospects of finishing the job? I'm talking about food security. You're talking against many who have said national security. And we still don't have that.
Yeah, well, and it is every bit of that. Food security is a national security issue. Certainly other countries around the world view it that way. And yes, I would love to get the elements of the Farm Bill that didn't get done in the One Big Beautiful Bill dealt with in a normal way through the regular bipartisan 60-vote threshold way of doing things around here. But that said, we did do a ton of Farm Bill policy in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Everything from the safety net programs, the agricultural risk coverage program, price loss coverage program, those were addressed, reference prices were raised, risk management was addressed through crop insurance, a lot of conservation policy in there, a lot of disaster policy with regard to livestock in particular. So there were a number of things done in the One Big Beautiful Bill that address what has been a problem, and that is that we haven't been able to get a bipartisan farm bill across the finish line in the last couple of years. Are there other things that need to be done? Yes. But I think we made good headway there, and we'll look for opportunities to finish the job. But remember, it's hard to find time to do things on the floor when you're spending all your time on nominations, which is where we are right now. And if the Democrats, they can change that if they want to, but it's very hard to do substantive legislation at a time when we're dealing with personnel 24/7, which is the situation we find ourselves in right now. And as I said, that's going to change. And if it doesn't change, we're going to grind it out here, and Democrats are going to be here whether they like it or not. Thanks.
Mr. President, yesterday afternoon, we reached an agreement with Democrats on an appropriations package. And I'm pleased to report that as of last night, we've passed 3 of the fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills: military construction, and Veterans Affairs, legislative branch, and agriculture. Those are the 3 appropriation bills that we were able to pass last night. I would say it is a very good start on appropriations, and a striking contrast, I might add, to last year when the Democrat leader failed to bring a single appropriations bill to the floor for a vote, notwithstanding the fact that 11 of the 12 had passed out of the Appropriations Committee with big bipartisan margins. And I want to thank Senate Appropriations Committee Chair Collins, as well as Senators Hoeven, Bozeman, and Mullen. I also want to thank Senator Moran, who's done outstanding work on the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill, and that would have passed last night had it not been for the opposition of a single Democrat senator. Thanks are due to all the members of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which has now reported out eight of the 12 fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills. The Senate is currently in its best place on appropriations in years, and I'm grateful for all those who worked cooperatively and in good faith to make last night's votes happen. It is good, Mr. President, to have the Senate back on a regular order track on appropriations, and I will continue to work for a regular order process as we continue. And I hope that Democrats will join us in that effort. It was disturbing to hear the Democrat leader threaten to shut down the government in his July 8th Dear Colleague letter. And I hope, Mr. President, I really hope the Democrats will not embrace that position, but will continue to work with Republicans to fund the government. As I said, we are in the best place we've been in years, but we have a lot of work to do. And I hope that we'll be able to continue the good work we began last night with continued bipartisan cooperation. Now, Mr. President, I wish I had more good news or better news to offer this morning on the nominations front. I wish I could say that we had also reached an agreement on a nominations package yesterday. But unfortunately, Democrats continue to engage in their historic obstruction. Mr. President, for decades, Democrats and Republicans have regularly cooperated to swiftly confirm the many individuals selected by each president to serve in their administration. Regardless of the party in the White House, both sides have long agreed that a president deserves to have his or her administration in place quickly. That doesn't mean we don't disagree, but it does mean when nominees are held up, opposed, or blocked, it's for a legitimate purpose, not for leverage in partisan games to score political points at the expense of public safety. Now, let me repeat that last line, Mr. President. But it does mean when nominees are held up, opposed, or blocked, it's for a legitimate purpose, not for leverage in partisan games to score political points at the expense of public safety, end quote. Now, interestingly enough, Mr. President, those last lines aren't mine. Those are the words of the Democrat leader just 3 short years ago. And I truly wish it was the philosophy of the Democrat leader and his party still espoused today. But instead, they have embraced a historic level of obstruction, slow-walking every single one of President Trump's civilian nominees, including nominees who have ultimately received substantial Democrat support. That is the very definition of the partisan games the Democrat leader deplored just a few short years ago. And so just to put a fine point on that, Mr. President, I want to show you where we are relative to history with regard to nominations. As you can see, going back to the presidency of George H.W. Bush, 41, as he is affectionately described by many, 98% of all the nominees were confirmed either by voice vote or unanimous consent. That was also true of a Democrat president, Bill Clinton. George W. Bush, 43, had 90% of his nominees confirmed either by voice vote or unanimous consent. And President Obama, so we went Republican back to Democrat, also had 90% of his nominees confirmed either by voice vote or unanimous consent. Well, that started to drop off in the first Trump administration down to 65%, dropped down to 57% during the Biden administration. But what's really striking, Mr. President, is here we are 6 months into, more than that really now, into this current administration, and that right there, a big fat zero, is what the Democrats have allowed in terms of nominees either confirmed by voice vote or unanimous consent. Now, under any circumstance, Mr. President, and I understand there are strong disagreements with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't like the president, all that. There's certainly that element, but this is historic and unprecedented obstruction when it comes to allowing someone who has been elected by the people of this country in a fairly significant, I would argue, mandate, an election, to get their person in place to do the jobs that the American people elected that president, President Trump, to do. And so you cannot, under any circumstance, defend that. Now, you can say, you know, we can argue, and these numbers are not moving in the right direction, which is why I would argue we've got to change the process by which we do this. Otherwise, we're going to continue to deteriorate to where any president that comes in here is going to be very, very hard-pressed to do the job the American people elected him to do. So, but really, that one right there, that big fat zero sticks out in a very big and significant way. And I wonder how Democrats' continued determination to slow walk President Trump's nominees will play with the voters, who, after all, as I said, elected President Trump with the thought that he'd be able to fill up his administration. Mr. President, Democrats need to get serious about agreeing to a nominations package to confirm a number of these outstanding nominations. And I would tell you, and they are well aware of this, that a lot of the nominees on the current backlog are nominees who have bipartisan support. In some cases, broad bipartisan support. Multiple Democrats voting for these nominees coming out of the committee. There are a whole bunch of those that are backed up on this backlog. And so, Mr. President, I sincerely hope that they will change their tune and decide to work with this administration to make that happen. Otherwise, I mean, I've said this before, and I think it's true. I mean, we are setting records around here for hours in session. We are setting records around here for number of votes cast. I mean, not by a little, by a lot, relative to previous Senates. And a lot of it has to do with that statistic I just pointed out. It's time for that to change, Mr. President, and we're not asking a lot. We're just simply saying, treat this president, at least on some level, in the way that previous presidents, both Democrats and Republican presidents, have been treated in the past by both Republican and Democrat Senates. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Putzer nomination.
Is there objection? Without objection?
Mr. President, I yield the floor. Oh, sorry. And I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, for decades, Democrats and Republicans have regularly cooperated to swiftly confirm the many, many individuals selected by each president to serve in their administration. Regardless of the party in the White House, both sides have long agreed that a president deserves to have his or her administration in place quickly. That doesn't mean we don't disagree, but it does mean when nominees are held up, opposed, or blocked, it's for a legitimate purpose, not for leverage and partisan games to score political points at the expense of public safety, end quote. Let me just repeat that, Mr. President. That doesn't mean we don't disagree, but it does mean when nominees are held up, opposed, or blocked, it's for a legitimate purpose, not for leverage and partisan games to score political points at the expense of public safety. Again, end quote. Now, Mr. President, none of those words are original to me. So far, I have simply been quoting the Democrat leader from back in 2022. But his words perfectly summarize the long-standing tradition of the Senate, a tradition that Democrats have destroyed this year. Mr. President, the Democrat leader correctly stated, and again I quote, "For decades, Democrats and Republicans have regularly cooperated to swiftly confirm the many, many individuals selected by each president to serve in their administration," end quote. Now, on a practical level, that's looked like expediting individual nominees and blocks of nominees by using unanimous consent or voice vote, which a way, as you know here in the Senate, Mr. President, of moving things along more quickly. During President George H.W. Bush's 4 years in office and President Clinton's first 4 years, both presidents had 98% of their civilian nominees, get this, 98% confirmed through unanimous consent or voice vote. George W. Bush, President Bush, and President Obama both had 90% of their civilian nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote in their first terms. And then we get to President Trump's first administration. Democrats, upset at the president's election, introduced an unprecedented new level of partisanship into the historically bipartisan confirmation process, forcing time-consuming votes on civilian nominees who would once have gone by unanimous consent or by voice vote. But even so, Mr. President, despite this new level of partisanship introduced by Democrats, both President Trump in his first term and President Biden had more than half of their nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Well, fast forward to today. President Trump has been in office for 8 months, and he has not had one single civilian nominee confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Not one. Democrats have dragged out the process of every single nominee. Even on nominees they ended up voting for by large margins. It's Trump derangement syndrome on steroids, Mr. President. That's right. Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. If this were a matter of historically bad nominees, as the Democrat leader tried to claim, then Democrats wouldn't be voting for a number of these nominees in committee or supporting them on final passage. No, Mr. President, this isn't about the quality of the candidates or any other substantive issue. This is simply the world's longest, most drawn-out temper tantrum over losing an election. Democrats can't stand the fact that President Trump was elected. And so they've destroyed decades upon decades of Senate precedent and turned a historically bipartisan process into an exercise in petty partisanship. An exercise in petty partisanship that is doing a profound disservice to the American people. Because, of course, Democrats' actions have consequences. First and foremost, those consequences are delays in filling essential positions throughout the administration, in our government, the people's government. Empty desks do not help the government function, and unnecessary delays rob a duly elected president of the team he needs to carry out his responsibilities. Dragging out confirmations also ties up the Senate floor. As the senior senator from Minnesota said last year, in what I would say were much less dire confirmation circumstances, and I quote, "As the Senate spends more of its time working on nominations, this leaves less time for legislating on issues that are important to the American people," end quote. Well, thanks to Democrats' historic obstruction, that is even more true today. We are, in fact, as the senior Democrat from Minnesota said, at risk of becoming, and I quote again, a full-time employment agency, end quote. Mr. President, this situation has become unsustainable. To clear the current backlog of nominees on the calendar and in committee, we would need to take another 600 votes before the end of the year. Now, let me just repeat that to put it into context. To clear the current backlog of nominees on the calendar and in committee, we would need to take another 600 votes. Now, to put that number in perspective, that's more votes than this record-breaking Senate has taken all year up until now. And again, that's just for nominations
that have already been sent to Congress, not those that are going to be forwarded and that we're going to have to process here additionally on top of the 600 votes between now and the end of the year. There literally are hundreds more nominations to come from the administration. So if Democrat obstruction continues, as Democrats have made abundantly clear that it will, there is no practical way that we could come close to filling all the vacancies in the 4 years of this administration, no matter how many hours the Senate works. And so, Mr. President, we've got a crisis, and it's time to take steps to restore Senate precedent and codify in Senate rules what once was understood to be standard practice, and that is the Senate acting expeditiously on presidential nominations to allow a president to get his team into place. And so this afternoon I'll be taking the necessary procedural steps to amend the rules. It is an idea, as I said earlier, with a Democrat pedigree. The senior Democrat, senator from Minnesota, along with her colleague in the Democrat caucus, the junior senator from Maine, made a similar proposal in 2023, which would have codified in Senate rules the longtime Senate precedent of en bloc nominations, of moving nominations in groups. Our measure is not as extensive, I should say, as that of my Democrat colleagues. It only applies to nominees at the sub-cabinet level and not to Article III judicial nominees as theirs did. But the proposals share the same objective, and that is providing for confirming groups of nominees all together so the President can have his team in place and so the Senate can focus on the important legislative work in its charge. Or to quote the senior Democrat from Minnesota on her very similar proposal, and I quote again, "This common sense reform will help improve efficiency and make sure we're able to fill positions that are vital to our national security, economic success, and more." End quote. Mr. President, 8 months of petty partisanship is long enough. This Senate has cast more votes up to this point than any Senate going back to the 1980s. We have been in more hours than any Senate going back a couple of decades. This historic obstruction ends now. Democrats have destroyed Senate precedent, and we're going to fix it. Fix it and ensure that in the future, duly elected presidents of both parties are able to get their teams in place without unnecessary delay so that they can fulfill their responsibilities to the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are only hours away from a government shutdown, and the Democrats have a very clear binary choice. They can choose to keep the government open by voting for a short-term, nonpartisan, clean, continuing resolution, 24 pages long, or they can vote to shut the government down. That's what we're looking at. They, as you all know, have voted during the time they had the majority 13 different times, and when Biden was in the White House, on short-term continuing resolutions, 13 different times. And so it begs the question is what's changed? And I think what's changed is President Trump is in the White House. That's what this is about. This is politics. And there isn't any substantive reason why there ought to be a government shutdown. This is something that has been done routinely, as I said, 13 different times when the Democrats had the majority. But we are not going to be held hostage for over $1 trillion in new spending on a continuing resolution, nor are we going to be held hostage to allow illegals to get free health care in a continuing resolution. These are things that they're demanding as part of their so-called negotiation. Ladies and gentlemen, there isn't anything here to negotiate. This is a routine funding resolution to keep the government open so that we can continue our appropriations work and fund the government in the old-fashioned way, which is allowing the Appropriations Committee, Democrats and Republicans, to work together as they have been. And by the way, the Democrat leader keeps talking about not consulting. The Appropriations Committee, they picked the date. Democrats and Republicans, the big four on the Appropriations Committee, were consulting. They picked the date for the continuing resolution, November the 21st. And so this has been an open process from the very beginning. This year we opened up the appropriations process, something that wasn't done when the Democrats had the majority here in the Senate. But they have a clear choice in front of them today. And I hope there are Democrats out there. This may not represent the view of their leadership, but I'm hoping there are Democrats out there who are reasonable and understand what's at stake here. And as they have articulated many times in the past, the costs associated to the American people with the government shutdown. This is totally avoidable. It is a decision they're going to have to make, and if the government shuts down, it is on the Senate Democrats. The House has acted, the President's ready to sign the bill, and all that's left is for 8 Democrats to join us in passing that bill today. Senator Brasso.
Well, the radical wing of the Democrat Party is demanding that Chuck Schumer shut down the government. If not, they'll be held to pay. We know that Chuck Schumer has had a war room going for the last couple of months to orchestrate the shutdown. That is their plan. So he comes up with this ransom note asking for $1 trillion to just keep the government open for 4 weeks. Republicans aren't going to buy that. President Trump's not going to sign it. There's a solution, and it's a simple, clean, continuing resolution to keep the government funded for the next 7 weeks as the appropriations committees work through the process. Democrats are pretty familiar with this. They've done it 13 times when Biden was in office, and the minimum number of votes they got was 65. But Chuck Schumer continues to bow down to that liberal wing, AOC, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. The American people should not suffer the costs and the consequences of a Schumer shutdown because he is politically toxic in his own party.
All right, Mayor. Good afternoon. Do you think if the president goes through and unilaterally starts to cut programs or lay people off, that will start to resonate with some of your Republican colleagues and say, hey, wait a minute, he has that authority, but these are programs or things that are important to us. Is that a risk for Republicans?
Well, it's a risk that can be totally avoided. And if you're a Democrat who on countless occasions in the past has talked about the adverse consequences, the words of the Democrat leader, harmful, painful, chaotic consequences of a government shutdown, then just vote to keep the government open. I mean, those are things that they don't control, we don't control. How a shutdown gets managed is, at this point, a hypothetical question.
But your members aren't concerned that this might backfire, and sometimes these programs come back and they say, wait a minute, that was important to my state, that was important to my district.
Our members are unified that a government shutdown is a really bad idea for all those reasons, and it's the exact reason why Democrats ought to vote to keep the government open.
Democrats have been pretty clear. They're going to defeat this House CR when it comes to the floor today. What is Plan B? Will you keep on bringing this back to the floor? And do you think the House should reconvene before Tuesday to maybe move the ball?
I don't know what the House can do that they haven't already done. They passed the bill. It's a bill that's passed by the House, sitting here in the Senate, ready to be signed into law by the President. And so, no, it's up to the Senate Democrats. That's where we are. And if they decide to vote it down tonight, they're going to be the ones that have to explain at midnight tonight why the government is shut down. It's really pretty straightforward. And this is something, again, that's been routine around here for a long time until all of a sudden the far left, as Senator Barrasso pointed out, hijacked the Democrat leadership here in the Senate, and they've decided to hijack the American people and hold them hostage to try and get a laundry list, a wish list, a Christmas list of their left-wing priorities attached, in their case, to a 4-week continuing resolution. Ours is 7 weeks, but they'll have the same leverage 7 weeks from now that they have today. And as I've said before, we're happy to sit down with them and talk about the concerns they have, the issues they have with, for example, the premium tax credits. But you got to do that. You can't do that in the context of a hostage situation. They need to release the hostage.
If there is a shutdown.
No market in China, high input costs, low prices, and they are in a bind and going to need some additional help. Now, on top of that, they're facing a shutdown.
Right, and that's why we need to keep the government open. I'm just saying, the farm service agencies in my state, the Federal Highway Administration employees in my state or any of the other states, and my colleagues who are represented here, the Park Service employees in our state, these are all people that are going to be affected by this, and not to mention our military men and women, or men and women in uniform. So this is a totally avoidable crisis, and again, we are not going to be held hostage by the Democrats for more than $1 trillion in new spending, and all kinds of other items on their liberal wish list, to include free health care for illegal immigrants in this country. That is all part of what can be avoided if they simply vote yes tonight.
Are you ruling out negotiations with Democrats if there's a shutdown? Are you ruling out any negotiations with Democrats if there is a shutdown?
The negotiation happens when the government's open. So let's keep the government open, and then we will have the negotiation. I've said it. I've said it yesterday at the meeting in the White House. I've said it to my Democrat colleagues. We're happy to sit down and talk about these other issues that they're interested in, but it should not have anything to do with whether or not, for a 7-week period, we keep the federal government open so that this government can continue to do its work, and that we can continue to do our work through the regular appropriations process to fund the government. This is not complicated. It's something that's happened routinely around here for a long time, including the 13 times it happened when the Democrats had the majority. So it's a binary choice. They get a chance to make that vote today, and I'm hoping, I sincerely do hope, in the best interest of the American people, that the Democrats here in Washington decide to keep our federal government open. Thank you.
Your impression? I'm like too far. Shouldn't have let him go. Shouldn't have let him
in. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's been 2 weeks since our first vote on a clean continuing resolution to keep the government open. The shutdown could have been avoided well before it began. But because Democrats have not budged from their partisan demands, the shutdown is now entering its 3rd day. Now, Mr. President, there's a lot that we could be doing right now. We could be considering bipartisan appropriations bills through regular order, going to conference on the 3 appropriations bills we passed in August, or passing the bipartisan annual defense bill. But instead, we're stuck in a shutdown mess of Democrats' making. And the American people are suffering as a result. Mr. President, Republicans remain united around a clean, nonpartisan funding extension. It's passed the House of Representatives, and it's currently sitting right here in the Senate, ready to be voted on. It has no new Republican policies, no partisan policy riders. It's straightforward, simple, and clean. All it does is reopen the government through November the 21st to give us more time to pass appropriations bills here on the floor. We have a number of bipartisan bills waiting for floor consideration right now. The only thing standing in the way of reopening the government and getting back to doing the important work is Democrats' $1.5 trillion in partisan spending demands. That's right, $1.5 trillion. Their partisan proposal demands more money, think about this, more money than our entire defense budget just to keep the government open for 4 weeks. That's not a credible proposal. It's a far-left wish list. And it's not how we're going to do things around here. Mr. President, we can end this shutdown in just a few hours. We need to take one roll call vote, just one roll call vote on the House-passed clean continuing resolution. The President of the United States says that he's ready to sign it. We just need a handful of Democrats to agree. Now, once we get the government back open, then we can talk about the issues that Democrats are raising. But we can't do that while they're holding the federal government hostage to their partisan demands. Mr. President, whatever Democrats are saying publicly, I think privately they are all well aware of the problems with their current position. The senior senator from Massachusetts has said, and I quote, "Hostage tactics are the last resort for those who can't win their fights through elections, can't win their fights in Congress, can't win their fights for the presidency, and can't win their fights in the courts," end quote. The Democrat leader called shutdowns, and I quote, "a politics of idiocy, of confrontation, of paralysis," end quote. Mr. President, this shutdown needs to end sooner rather than later. And there's only one way out of it. Democrats need to vote for the clean, nonpartisan, continuing resolution sitting right there. All it takes is one roll call vote. The government's back open. And Mr. President, we need to get this government back open, which we can do very, very quickly. And then we can talk about whatever we need to talk about. Just a few years ago, the Democrat leader had this to say, and I quote again, "We're allowed to come here and disagree over policy. In fact, our system of government was designed to allow for progress, despite our large and sometimes raucous differences. But when one side throws a temper tantrum and uses the basic functioning of our government as leverage in a policy argument, our system of government breaks down," end quote. Well, Mr. President, let's hope the Democrat leader decides to heed his own words and the Democrats' temper tantrum ends sooner rather than later. Mr. President, later today, a couple hours, Democrats will have another opportunity to vote for the clean continuing resolution. And we'll see if they're still committed to their shutdown politics. Republicans remain ready to reopen the government and to get back to doing the American people's business. How much longer this shutdown lasts depends entirely on Democrats. The choice is theirs. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we're now in day 6 of the Democrats' government shutdown. Day 6. And I'm wondering just what exactly Democrats think they're gaining from all of this. I guess they're getting points from the far-left interest groups that they've been coordinating their shutdown strategy with. But I highly doubt that they're earning a lot of points with everyday, hardworking Americans, like the voters that they lost in the last election. Mr. President, a Reuters headline from Thursday noted, and I quote, "U.S. government shutdown threatens food aid program for low-income Americans." Let me just read that again, Mr. President. U.S. government shutdown threatens food aid program for low-income Americans. The article noted that while the Trump Agriculture Department is doing its best to continue administering the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, more commonly known as WIC, the program is, quote, critically low on funds. And it won't get new funds until Democrats agree to reopen the government. Mr. President, Democrats own this. They own any lapse in funding for critical food aid programs, just as they own every other negative effect of the shutdown. Because let's remember, Mr. President, the only reason the government is shut down is because Democrats refuse to accept a clean, nonpartisan funding extension. A clean, nonpartisan funding extension. We didn't ask Democrats to swallow any new Republican policies. We didn't ask them to swallow any partisan riders. We simply asked them to agree to a clean, nonpartisan bill. The same kind of bill, Mr. President, I might add, that they voted for 13 times. 13 times during the Biden administration. The Democrats said no. And I should note, Mr. President, that you don't have to take my word for it on the facts of the bill. Republicans aren't the only ones pointing out that this is a clean CR. Here's what the president of the Teamsters Union had to say the other day, and I quote, "A shutdown will hurt working people, period. Senators should pass the House-passed clean, short-term funding bill," end quote. Senators should pass the House-passed clean, short-term funding bill, end quote. Again, that from the president of the Teamsters Union. Or, you could take the word of a mainstream journalist who recently noted, and I quote, "In a vacuum, this CR would get almost every Democrat vote." It just would. This is a clean CR that has no partisan riders, extends a bunch of programs that are Democrat priorities. It's clean. It's clean, Mr. President. So to summarize, Democrats have shut down the government because they refuse to accept a clean, nonpartisan bill. And why are they refusing to accept it? After all, as I mentioned, they supported similar bills 13 times during the Biden administration. The reason that they refuse to accept it is that Democrats still cannot get over the fact that the American people elected President Trump. And when their far left base demanded a showdown with the president, Democrats fell in line. And now it's the American people who are suffering the consequences. I quote again, "U.S. government shutdown threatens food aid program for low-income Americans." Threatens food aid program for low-income Americans. Mr. President, 3 Democrats have rejected their party shutdown politics and voted with Republicans to reopen the government. All Democrats will get another chance to vote to reopen the government later today. And for the sake of the American people, I hope at least a few more Democrats will join us to pass this clean, nonpartisan CR and let the Senate get back to work. Mr. President?
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Leader, are you going to have any conversations over the next couple of days with Leader Schumer about that? And to Jake's point, I guess, do you feel like maybe you're getting closer to an off-ramp here?
Well, I think Leader Schumer is checked out. I don't think this is going to happen. I think this is going to happen organically with enough reasonable Senate Democrats who care enough about doing the right thing for their country and not what's in the best interests of their left-wing political base to come forward and help us find a solution. And those conversations continue. But the insistence of the Democrat leadership on their plan or nothing else is, I don't know how do you even come forward with a proposal that has $1.5 trillion in new spending, wipes out everything that we did last summer with the reconciliation bill, including the $50 billion that goes to rural hospitals, and wipes out all the provisions that banned free health care to non-citizens. I mean, really? You think that's going to pass the Senate or even come close to getting a vote in the House or a signature by the President? What they're talking about is unserious. It's been unserious from the very beginning. So, yes, if they want to sit down and talk about opening up the government and doing some of the things that I've suggested and we've suggested, which is allowing the conference committee to work on the 3 appropriation bills we passed, bringing other appropriations bills to the floor so we can start funding the government the old-fashioned way, and there's an interest on both sides in doing that. And yeah, a conversation about what we do on the expiring enhanced ACA subsidies. And there's a lot of conversations going on around that. But that doesn't happen until we get the government open. Mr. President, quote, "Every day gets better for us," end quote. So said the Democrat leader in an interview published on Thursday, hours before Democrats once again voted to keep the government closed and to deny service members a paycheck. Federal workers, including law enforcement officers, missed part of their pay last Friday. But hey, at least life is getting better for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, a CNN article from Thursday said that Democrats are preparing to keep on with this shutdown for, and I quote, "several more weeks." I guess Democrats are not going to be satisfied until military families and government workers are lining up at food banks or visiting payday lenders or simply charging necessary items like milk and bread on their credit cards to be repaid later, if they can, along with the big interest charges that come with that. But hey, while military families and government workers may be deeply stressed, at least life is getting better every day for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I could at least understand a little bit more where Democrats are coming from if Republicans were asking them to swallow a lot of new Republican policies to reopen the government. But Republicans aren't asking Democrats for anything. We're not asking them to support any new Republican policies. We're not asking them to swallow any partisan policy riders. We have put forward, and the House has passed, a clean, nonpartisan CR. That's the bill Democrats are rejecting. And by the way, you certainly don't have to take my word for it that we put forward a clean bill. Here's what one mainstream news publication said last week, and I quote, "It's important to note that Democrats instigated this shutdown. They rejected a clean funding proposal and demanded significant and expensive health care policy changes in exchange for their votes," end quote. It's important to note that Democrats instigated this shutdown. They rejected a clean funding proposal and demanded significant and expensive health care policy changes in exchange for their votes, end quote. Yeah, that pretty much captures it right there in a nutshell, Mr. President. Now, Democrats like to whine that Republicans aren't negotiating, but negotiation, Mr. President, is what you do when each side has a list of demands and you need to meet in the middle. Republicans, as I and a lot of other people have pointed out, haven't put forward any demands. Only Democrats have made demands. And by the way, very expensive demands. And they've taken government funding hostage in an attempt to force through their partisan measures. Mr. President, I remember when Democrats used to care about the effects of a government shutdown. In fact, I could fill a whole speech, many speeches actually, with quotes from Democrats talking about how terrible shutdowns are. I used to think they were sincere in those opinions, but it's become abundantly clear that their previous statements weren't based on principle, but on political advantage. Democrats were against shutdowns when it suited their political purposes, and now that it suits their political purposes, they think, to keep the government closed, now they support shutdowns. I suspect their political calculations are flawed, because after all, 65% of voters think Democrats should reopen the government instead of holding out for their partisan demands. But I guess, Mr. President, Democrats are more worried about gaining the approval of their far-left base than about getting the approval of everyday Americans. Mr. President, it's day 14 of Democrat shutdown. Our economy is losing billions of dollars. Federal workers, including law enforcement officers, are going without pay. Critical government programs are in jeopardy. But hey, at least life is getting better every day for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum. Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Democrats are dug in. 15 days into a government shutdown, Democrats show no sign that they're ready for it to end. Not even the prospect of military families going without a paycheck was enough for Democrats to reopen the government. Nor are Democrats concerned about needy families uncertain about the future of nutrition assistance, or Americans in flood zones who are unable to update their insurance or close on a home in the midst of hurricane season. No, Democrats are dug in. And all those Americans living in uncertainty, well, they're just going to have to wait until Democrats' far-left base is satisfied. Mr. President, Democrats attempt to defend their funding blockade by complaining that Republicans won't negotiate. But what exactly is there to negotiate? Negotiation happens when you have two sides, each with its own demands. Republicans have no demands. We've offered Democrats a clean, nonpartisan funding extension. Democrats, on the other hand, are insisting on $1.5 trillion in new partisan spending in exchange for their votes. Now think about that, Mr. President. Let's put this in perspective. $1.5 trillion in new spending in their proposal to keep the government open for 4 weeks till the end of October. Well, we're already at the middle of October. So basically, they're saying they want $1.5 trillion in taxpayer dollars to keep the government open for the next 2 weeks. Think about that one. As our colleague from Louisiana put it, you need a spreadsheet to keep track of everything they're asking for. The truth is that what Democrats really want is something Republicans can't give them. And that's the approval of their far-left base. They're looking for praise from the likes of MoveOn.org and Indivisible. This weekend, Indivisible is holding rallies around the country. And Democrats' motivations are laid bare by what one of the leaders of that far-left group told CNN last week. He said, and I quote, "I'm telling every elected I talk to, millions will be out cheering you on, or they'll be calling for new leadership." End quote. Cheering you on or calling for new leadership. Mr. President, that's Democrats' motivation. Pleasing their far-left base and preserving their political careers. Meanwhile, we're reading stories about military families lining up at food banks, flight delays because of understaffed airport towers, needy families uncertain about the food assistance they depend upon. But our Democrat colleague from Rhode Island says, and I quote, "For Democrats, it's so far, so good." End quote. So far, so good. I doubt military families and federal workers would agree. If there was ever anything to make it clear that Democrats are in this for their own political advantage, it is callous comments like this one, or the Democrat leader's statement that, and I quote, "every day gets better." End quote, for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, while Democrats may be basking in praise from their far-left base, polls show that most Americans want this shutdown to end. 2/3 of voters think Democrats should reopen the government rather than hold out for their partisan demands. And if just 5 more Democrats would show some courage, we could do just that. We need 5 more Democrats to say, enough is enough, to put the American people ahead of the far left, and to support this clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution sitting right there at the Senate desk, ready to be picked up and passed today, put on the President's desk, signed into law, and the government reopens. If just 5 more Democrats would show some courage, we could do just that. So, Mr. President, 5 more votes, this bill could be on its way to the White House. As I said, President Trump stands ready to sign it. It is clean. It is nonpartisan. It has no policy writers, no partisan gimmicks. It simply funds the government for a foreseeable time to November the 21st to give us an opportunity to finish the appropriations process under regular order and to deal with the funding of the government in the way that it should be funded, in an open, transparent process that uses the committees under regular order, the Appropriations Committee, subcommittees, the floor, open to amendments. Again, I know that's a novel concept. That's a novel concept compared to the way the Democrats did it when they had the majority. Even though the Appropriations Committee did its work last year, 11 of the 12 appropriations bills were reported out, not a single one was brought to the floor of the Senate. Because they like to negotiate behind closed doors with a handful of people deciding on behalf of everybody else. That is not the way this place ought to work, Mr. President. Troops need to get paid. Families need to get the help they need. All this uncertainty for the American people needs to go away. And we can get back to work on the things that really matter. But the question is, are Democrats interested in that? Or are they more interested in being cheered by far-left groups at Saturday's rally? Well, I guess we'll see soon enough. Will today be day 15 of Democrat shutdown? We'll have another opportunity later today to vote on that bill sitting right at the desk. 5 more Democrats, it passes. It goes to the White House, gets signed into law by the President, and the government opens up. Will today be day 15 of Democrat shutdown? Or will it be the day we reopen the government and get back to the business of serving the American people? Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum. Mr. President, just to remind our colleagues, we've had now a series 3 votes and a couple of them on judges, but one of the votes in there was on a Senator Johnson proposal that would have paid all federal employees who are currently working in the middle of a shutdown. Now, I don't know how you explain, if you have any federal employees, how you would vote against something that would make sure that in the middle of a government shutdown, if they continue to work, that they get paid. That's all it was. Very simple, very straightforward. And I, for the life of me, again, I think the other side is in a very bad headspace right now to vote against something like that. If you have any federal employees in your state, obviously a lot of them here in this area, all of our staffs are currently not getting paid. Senator Johnson tried to correct that today by calling up a bill, which we just voted on, in which, once again, Democrats here in this chamber voted against. Now, we've had in front of us, we've had a dozen votes now on a continuing resolution that would open up the government. It's been sitting at the desk now for some time. The House has passed it. We need 5 Democrats to join us. Send it to the President. He will sign it into law. The government opens up. It's clean. It's nonpartisan. It has no policy writers, no partisan gimmicks attached to it. It is a straightforward continuing resolution to fund the government until a certain time. And Senator Johnson's was even more straightforward than that, really, because it simply said that if you are a federal employee and you are currently working today, like everybody here in this chamber, you will get paid. And again, I can't explain what's going on and on the other side of the aisle, but they consistently come down here and vote against paying people who are working every single day and not getting paid. So, Mr. President, that was the vote we had just a couple of votes ago.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the post-cloture time with respect to the Tableson nomination be expired and the Senate vote on confirmation of the nomination at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic Leader no earlier than Monday, October the 27th. Further, if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
With that objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to legislative session. Mr. President, quote, "There is a time and a place to debate health care, just like there is a time and place to debate energy policy and immigration and education, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance," end quote. There is a time and a place to debate health care, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance. Those are not my words, Mr. President. Those are the words of the junior Democrat senator from Connecticut back in 2013. There is a time and a place to debate health care, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance. These words were once emblematic of the Democrat position here in the Senate. Democrats once passionately opposed shutdowns, or so they said, in large part because of the impact they would have on American citizens and American workers. Now? Well, now government workers and every other American affected by this shutdown have become nothing more than pawns in the Democrats' political games. On Friday, federal workers missed their entire paychecks. The next paycheck for our troops, Mr. President, is in jeopardy. And more than 40 million Americans could lose access to food stamps if the shutdown continues. 40 million. And yet none of it seems to matter to Senate Democrats. The party that once decried the impact of shutdowns on Americans in need and now apparently content to see 40 million Americans go without food. The senior Democrat senator from Vermont was on TV the other day, and one of the hosts suggested that members of Congress should refuse to take their paychecks during a shutdown. And what did the senior Democrat senator from Vermont say? He said that some members of Congress couldn't afford to go without pay. That's right. That some members of Congress couldn't afford to go without pay. Does he think that other Americans can? The junior Democrat senator from Arizona told NBC News near the beginning of the shutdown that he couldn't afford to miss his paycheck. This was his quote: "I'm not wealthy, and I have 3 kids. I would basically be missing, mortgage payments, rent payments, child support. So it's not feasible, not going to happen," end quote. What on earth does he think is happening to federal workers and other Americans out of work because of the Democrat shutdown? Does he think they don't have mortgage payments, rent payments, school expenses, electric bills? If some members of Congress can't afford to miss a paycheck, how much more is that true for the many workers making a lot less than members of Congress pull down? The junior Democrat senator from Minnesota stated that she would not be foregoing her pay because she's continuing to work. Because she's continuing to work. Do Democrats even hear themselves? She does realize, right, that a lot of other people are continuing to work and have been working without pay now for 4 weeks thanks to her actions and those of her Democrat colleagues. How many of those workers are going to miss their rent payments or mortgage payments before Democrats are satisfied? Shutdowns aren't victimless crimes, the senior Democrat from Virginia said.
less than a year ago, I might add. Well, Mr. President, Democrats' victims are piling up. And Democrats don't look likely to spare anyone anytime soon. In fact, they're freely admitting it. The second-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives said recently, and I quote, I got it right here, Mr. President. Of course, there will be families that are going to suffer, but it is one of the few leverage times we have. But it is one of the few leverage times we have. I guess the Americans currently lining up at food banks can comfort themselves with the knowledge that they're being sacrificed to advance Democrats' political goals. Mr. President, if you ask Democrats the reason for the 180-degree flip in their views on shutdowns, if you challenge them to explain their hypocrisy, I suspect you wouldn't get much of an answer. I suspect that at best Democrats would bleat something about how this shutdown is a special case. Right? A special case. It's always a special case with Democrats. A historic blockade of presidential nominees. Well, that was a special case. Ignore anything that you've ever said about shutdowns right here on the floor of the Senate. Well, this is a special case. I'll tell you what's actually special about this case, Mr. President. Special about this case is that Democrats' far-left base demanded a showdown with President Trump. And Democrats have abandoned every principle that they possessed relating to shutdowns to give it to their base. And while some Democrats may be privately uncomfortable about all the damage a 4-week shutdown is doing, so far, they're too scared of their base to do anything about it. Mr. President, Democrats claim that this shutdown is about addressing the expiring Obamacare COVID subsidies. But that's not really what this is about. If this was really what this is about, the Democrats would be voting to reopen the government so that we could actually engage in a serious discussion about rising health care costs and how Obamacare has failed to address them. But they're not. Because at the end of the day, Democrats don't want a solution. They want a political issue. And if countless hardworking Americans are sacrificed in the process, of course there will be families that are going to suffer. But it is one of the few leverage times we have. Apparently, that's just fine with the Democrats here in the Senate. Mr. President, we'll be voting once again this week to reopen the government. To reopen the government, restore hardworking Americans' paychecks, protect nutrition programs, support critical services like air traffic control, and that list goes on and on and on. And Democrats will have a 13th chance to vote on a clean, nonpartisan funding bill that will reopen the government. All we need are 5 Democrats to join the 3 who are with us already. And we could have the government open in a matter of hours. It's that simple, Mr. President. The solution is sitting right at that desk. The bill that passed the House a month ago is sitting at this desk and has been now for a month. And we have repeatedly called it up asked us to vote on it, and every time we get 55 senators voting for it, everybody knows the rules in the Senate require 60. But that bill, with 5 courageous Democrats stepping forward and helping us pass it, could be on the President's desk, signed into law, and this government reopens. It could happen today. It could happen this afternoon. Let's just hope, Mr. President, that somewhere those courageous Democrats exist. Shutdowns, even partial ones, are as devastating as they are stupid. That was what the senior Democrat from Virginia said just last year. So how do you justify what you're doing now? It's up to them, Mr. President. We can do it, and we can do it today. I yield the floor. Suspended.
Without objection.
And I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Thank you. Mr. President, we're now in day 29 of the Democrat government shutdown. And I say that because it is a Democrat shutdown. Now, the Democrats are out there publicly saying, well, this is the Republicans who are responsible for shutting down the government, notwithstanding the fact that the House of Representatives has passed a bill sitting right here that with 5 more Democrats, we could pick up and pass, put on the President's desk, he would sign it into law, and the government would reopen. Those are the simple facts. Those are indisputable facts. Now, what it suggests to me, however, when they say that it's the Republicans' fault or somehow the Republicans are responsible for shutting the government down, it really defies facts. It defies history. It defies reality. Because as everybody who's been around here knows, we have now voted 13 times. 13 times on that bill sitting at the desk that would open up the government, put everybody back to work, and all the pain that is being caused by the American people would go away. 13 times we've had that vote. Now, interestingly enough, that matches the number of times the Democrats passed a clean CR when they had the majority. The last 4 years under President Biden, 13 different occasions, they voted for a clean continuing resolution to fund the government. And at the time, they talked about how terrible it is that, the government should be taken hostage and you have a dispute over other issues. You got tons of statements. I mean, I could spend all day just repeating the statements that Democrats made over and over and over again about the importance of funding the government and not taking it hostage to discuss other issues. The record is replete with statements like that coming out of the Democrats. So 13 times they have voted against funding the government right here. 13 times while they were in the majority, they voted for a clean continuing resolution. Now explain that logic to the American people, who are the ones that are experiencing the pain and the consequence of their shutdown. I think the American people understand what's going on here. We consistently see that, and so much so that you even have the organizations, the unions around the country have come out now. You got the American Federation of Government Employees, you got the Teamsters, you got at least part of the Air Traffic Controllers Union, all have endorsed a clean funding resolution. That to me suggests that the American people, it is resonating with them about who's responsible for this government shutdown. But don't take my word for who it is. Take the Democrats' own words. If you look at what's been said by some of the Democrat leadership here, just in the last few days since the government actually shut down, that, of course, is the Democrat leader, Senator Schumer, who said every day gets better for us, commenting about the government shutdown. And my simple observation is, better for who? For you? Because you think you're winning politically? What about the air traffic controllers? What about the TSA agents? What about the American troops? What about our Border Patrol agents? What about the people who work in this building? What about the 40 million Americans that are going to not get SNAP benefits starting on Saturday if the government doesn't open up? But every day gets better, according to Senator Schumer. And then, of course, this last week, there was the House Democrat whip who said, of course, there will be families that are going to suffer, but it is one of the few leverage times we have. Of course, there are families that are going to suffer. Yeah, true. But doesn't matter because we got leverage. Then, of course, we have a third one here, one of our colleagues here in the Senate, the senator from Delaware, who said this in an interview, frankly, this is our only moment of leverage, and although a very unpleasant tool to use. Yeah, it's unpleasant. It's unpleasant unless you're a Democrat who thinks that this gives you a moment of leverage. So lest there be any question about who is responsible for shutting the government down, make no mistake about it. These guys are the ones who are out there bragging about it getting better for us every single day. Or we have more leverage now. Mr. President, this has gone on long enough. We've made it abundantly clear that this is not about what the Democrats say it's about. It's about the President in the White House. This is TDS. This is Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. And they are asking the American people to pay the price for that. 13 times when Biden was president, they had no issues with funding the federal government with a clean CR. Now we bring a clean, nonpartisan CR, no partisan riders, no policies, Republican policies attached, just funds the government. Comes over from the House a month ago now. We put it here, just asking a handful of Democrats to join us because, as we know, it takes 60 in the Senate. And I think most people understand that. I mean, they're trying to ignore the fact now that the Republicans have control of Washington. They have the House, the Senate, and the White House. Anybody who follows this knows that in the United States Senate, the rules, the procedures in the Senate by which we operate and are governed require a 60-vote threshold. So it takes more than 51, meaning, since we have 53 Republicans, it's going to take a handful of Democrats. Well, we've been able to generate 55 votes consistently now, 13 different times, for funding the government, opening up the government, but we need 5 more. So the question is, are there 5 people over there with a backbone, 5 courageous Democrats, 5 Democrats who don't buy this, who don't believe that they ought to be using the American people as leverage, to try and win a political battle? Are there 5 Democrats over there who believe that we ought to do what's in the best interest of the American people, the best interests of the air traffic controllers and the TSA agents, and the men and women in uniform, and the SNAP recipients that starting on Saturday are going to go without food assistance? This is not a game. You're playing with real people's lives. Now, in the Washington world, in the political world, they may think that they are winning this debate because it gives them leverage. But in the real world, where real people live, people are hurting. People here aren't getting paid. Federal workers aren't getting paid. As of Friday, last paycheck. Air traffic controllers, paychecks started going away yesterday. So, I'm still hopeful. I remain hopeful that there are enough sane Democrats who are not so afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome, because that is what this is about, fundamentally. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. This is about Trump derangement syndrome. And it has broken out over here in a way unlike anything I've seen in my time here. Disagree with the president, that's fine. come down here, make statements, cast votes. Don't take the American people hostage and make them pay the price because you think that every day this is getting better for us. Now, Mr. President, the Democrat leader was on the floor yesterday morning claiming that once again Republicans don't want to talk about fixing health care. And let me just say, Mr. President, for the 1,282nd time, that Republicans are more than happy to have a discussion about health care. We should have a discussion about health care because Democrats' signature health care law has done exactly nothing to address the problem of rising health care costs. We were promised, of course, that it would. We were, in fact, promised that Democrats' signature law would fix our entire health care system. This is a quote. An historic bill that will finally reform our broken health care system and help millions of families and small businesses get the coverage they need at a price they can afford, end quote. That from the senior Democrat senator from Washington, speaking of Obamacare back in 2009. Or to quote President Obama himself, this law will cut costs and make coverage more affordable for families and small businesses, end quote. Cut costs and make coverage more affordable for families and small businesses. Except, of course, it didn't. And what has been very striking about the last few weeks is the Democrats are at least now admitting that. Oh yeah, they're saying it, they're not saying it straight out, but every time they talk about Americans facing a health care crisis, they are admitting that their signature health care law failed, that it did not address the problem of high health care costs, that it did not make health care more affordable for hardworking Americans. Now, Mr. President, I could go down the list of Obamacare's broken promises. If you like your health insurance, you can keep it. Not true. If you like your doctor, you can keep him or her. Not true. Premium costs will go down. Not true. Exactly the opposite. You look at since 2013 to today, what premium costs have done in the individual marketplace on the exchanges, it is a line like this. So suffice it to say, as Democrats are now implicitly admitting that Obamacare massively failed in its aims, Democrats, of course, now want to put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound by extending the Biden COVID bonuses. But of course, extending those credits will do nothing to fix the underlying problem, which is that health care costs will continue to spiral under Obamacare. Throwing $350 billion in taxpayer dollars at the problem in the form of enhanced tax credits will do nothing to stop Obamacare premiums from going up by double digits, because that is what they have been doing. And it will do nothing to improve health care for the majority of Americans who are not on Obamacare health plans, like our seniors, our most vulnerable citizens, and those who get their coverage through their employer. Mr. President, while Democrats are, shall we say, shaky on the facts when it comes to their dramatic health care speeches, while Obamacare premiums are increasing, the median plan premium is not, in fact, going to double next year. It is absolutely true that Democrats have created real health care problems. And as I've said more times than I can count, Republicans are ready and willing to have a discussion about those problems and about how we lower costs for hardworking Americans. We are, in fact, eager to have that discussion. The President is willing to have Democrats over to discuss it next week if they vote to reopen the government. Because in the words of the Democrat leader back in 2013, we are not going to negotiate with a gun to our heads. That's what he said. This is a serious matter. And I know Democrats think you can solve any problem simply by throwing billions of taxpayer dollars at it. The record's pretty clear on that. But you can't. Genuine remedies for the problem of soaring health care costs are not going to be arrived at with a brief late-night session behind closed doors in the Democrat leader's office. We need extended, serious bipartisan work with input from all senators. And we need Democrats to reopen the government so that work can start. Republicans are brimming over with health care ideas, from cost-sharing reductions to actually lower health care or health plan costs, I should say, to association health plans, to ways to stop Obamacare's spiral of enriching insurers at the expense of everyday Americans. In fact, we already took steps to make health care more affordable and accessible when we passed the One Big Beautiful Bill this summer, which expanded health savings accounts and telehealth for Americans, to say nothing of investing heavily in rural health care and ensuring that our health care entitlement programs are focused on those most in need. So I say, we are looking forward to having a real discussion with Democrats. But to quote another Democrat senator, the junior Democrat from Connecticut, there is a time and a place to debate health care, just like there is a time and a place to debate energy policy and immigration and education, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance, end quote. Mr. President, there are a lot of Americans suffering right now because of the Democrats' month-long shutdown. And the suffering increases every day. It's time. It's past time for Democrats to reopen the government. And once they do, Republicans look forward to having some serious discussions about how to address rising health care costs and the failures of the Democrats' signature health care law. Now, Mr. President, before I close, I'd like to mention a bill that Democrats are reportedly going to attempt to move by unanimous consent today. And I would just say that after a month of steadily increasing pain, thanks to the Democrats' shutdown, Democrats have apparently woken up to the fact that in 3 days, they're going to be responsible for SNAP recipients starting to go without food stamps. So what are Democrats doing? Are they making plans to end their shutdown and reopen the government? Nope. They're going to propose a bill to fund food stamps during their shutdown. That's right. Democrats don't want the bad press of hungry Americans. But they're also apparently unwilling to even contemplate ending their month-long shutdown. So they're trying to insulate themselves with this bill. Mr. President, do you know what's not in this bill? Paychecks for our troops. Paychecks for law enforcement officers and federal firefighters. Paychecks for air traffic controllers. Paychecks for other government workers. Funding for rental and housing assistance. Funding for small business loan programs. Funding for farm loan programs. Funding for tribal programs. Funding for Head Start. Funding for rural development programs. Funding for National Guard training. Funding for telehealth services. Shall I go on? Because I'm happy to. Every one of those programs I've mentioned has either run out of money, is running out of money, or is otherwise in jeopardy because of the Democrats' government shutdown. And the Democrats' bill would do nothing to support even one of those programs. Thanks to Democrats, federal workers are lining up at food banks. The Democrats' bill is certainly not going to help them as they struggle to pay the rent, or the electric bill, or make their car payment. Mr. President, enough is enough. This bill is a cynical attempt to provide political cover for Democrats to allow them to carry on their government shutdown even longer. And we're not going to let them pick winners and losers. It's time to fund everybody. And the bill sitting at the desk right there does that. We just need 5 brave Democrats. If Democrats really want to fund SNAP and WIC, we have a bill for them. A clean, nonpartisan CR to fund SNAP, WIC, and the entire federal government. Or we could pass the agricultural appropriations bill the Democrats have been resisting behind closed doors. That would fund SNAP, WIC, and our farm and conservation programs, not to mention ensuring salaries for the people who inspect our food and support our farmers. I'm happy to bring that up right now. Mr. President, Democrats have spent a month now, playing with people's livelihoods because the far left wing of their party won't let them accept a clean, nonpartisan CR. Enough is enough. We're not giving Democrats political cover. If they want to prevent damage from their shutdown, then they can end their shutdown. The bill's right there at the desk. And I will call a vote the minute Democrats tell me they have enough votes to fund the government. The ball's really in their court, Mr. President. Is this what you want the American people to think? That you're willing to give them enormous amounts of pain and adverse consequence so that you can gain leverage, political leverage. It's time to end it, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The Democratic leader.
In a few minutes, my good colleague from New Mexico, Senator Lujan, will be offering a unanimous consent request. And I want to thank him for his extraordinary leadership on the issue of SNAP, leading the way on an urgent issue for millions of Americans. Now, right now, we're facing down 2 crises at once, a health care crisis and a hunger crisis. And both are caused by and intensified by one man and one man only, Donald Trump. We're now 3 days away from open enrollment, and now for the first time in history, a president is refusing to fund SNAP during a shutdown. 42 million Americans, young children who need food, veterans who might have PTSD and need help, senior citizens who rely on SNAP to help feed themselves, and so many others, people who are out of work because they lost their jobs through no fault of their own, need SNAP. And why are we not doing it? Not because the money's gone. It's there. Not because it's not permitted. It's legal. But because Donald Trump ordered it stopped. It falls on his shoulders. Let's be clear. This does not need to happen. Never before, under any president, Republican or Democrat, has SNAP been cut off during a shutdown. We're not talking about, we're talking with the shutdown, we all know our position, we need a negotiation, but this SNAP doesn't have to happen in any case, and only because Donald Trump is doing it, and the Republican leadership goes along with Donald Trump to let SNAP expire. Trump did this once before. In 2019, he funded SNAP during his last shutdown. Back then, Trump kept SNAP funded. This time, he's deliberately pulling the plug, even though in September he said he would fund it and could fund it, independent of any shutdown. Trump is weaponizing hunger. He's using kids and parents as pawns. Donald Trump is a vindictive politician and a heartless man. Just a few weeks ago, Trump's own USDA confirmed it had $6 billion in emergency funds to keep food and aid flowing. When asked about SNAP, Trump assured everyone it will be fine. He said it. Then suddenly last Friday, Trump ordered USDA to delete the plan, take it off their website, and refuse to use the money. No reason, no explanation, just cruelty. 2/3 of SNAP recipients are kids, seniors, or people with disabilities. That's who Trump is cutting off. Kids who rely on school meals, seniors on fixed incomes, veterans trying to get by, families trying to get groceries. That's the real-world consequence of Trump's decision. And while he's manufacturing two crises here at home, where's his focus? Overseas, on a ballroom, on sending $40 billion to Argentina. There's money for Argentina, but not for SNAP. And the Argentina money far exceeds the money needed for SNAP for at least a whole month. Every president before him, Democrat and Republican, has used the same funds to keep families fed. Trump could fix this today with one stroke of his pen. We don't have to wait, we don't have to discuss, we don't have to deliberate. Let's be clear. Republicans have been on a crusade against SNAP all year. They slashed it by a historic $200 billion this summer in their so-called big, beautiful bill to pay for tax cuts for billionaires, and now they're doubling down, using this shutdown to devastate families and leave kids hungry. It's heartless, it's cynical, and it's wrong. Well, Senate Democrats are not waiting, and that's why I'm so grateful for Senator Lujan. In a few minutes, we'll force a vote to avert this avoidable crisis. I thank Senator Lujan, I thank him for championing the Keep SNAP and WIC Funded Act, which will make sure that 42 million Americans don't lose their benefits. It will make sure 7 million moms and babies on WIC aren't left behind. It's simple, it's moral, it's urgent. And if the other side wouldn't block it, I bet you it would pass overwhelmingly. And there's another bill by Senator Hawley, Republican, conservative. I believe it has 11 Republican co-sponsors already. So it's another bill that could pass. It doesn't have WIC, but it does SNAP. Democrats are ready to do what every president in American history has done, except for Trump, avert this problem. We're willing to work with anyone to get this bill on the floor and stop this cruelty. But right now, unfortunately, Senate Republicans, frozen, paralyzed by fear or cynicism, while enabling Trump to use millions of hungry Americans as political hostages. Senate Republicans should let this bill pass, and I yield to Senator Lujan for unanimous consent request.
The senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I rise today to ask my colleagues to pass my Keep SNAP and WIC Funded Act of 2025, which has the backing of the entire Democratic caucus, the Democratic members of this Senate. Now, we all know access to food is a human right. It's that simple. And we're all fortunate enough to live in the United States of America, a nation that's rich, it's abundant, a nation that's rich in agricultural tradition, can be abundant in harvest. Now, in a nation blessed with such abundance, allowing our fellow Americans to go hungry is sadly right now a policy decision. I would argue a political decision, not a financial necessity. Now, the Trump administration has yet again made the decision, made the choice to allow our fellow Americans to go hungry. Now, let's be clear. The only way to ensure that SNAP benefits are issued by November 1st is for the Trump administration to release the billions of dollars it has sitting in an account at USDA that Congress appropriated, Democrats and Republicans working together to appropriate, to use for this purpose. As a matter of fact, never in the history of the United States has SNAP been allowed to lapse like this. As a matter of fact, during President Trump's first term, Secretary Perdue, President Trump, they tapped this same fund to allow SNAP benefits to continue to roll. Now, President Trump says that the use of SNAP contingency funds is illegal. Well, here's the document that was taken down from the USDA website that was up just days ago. He decided to take this down, and now even the Speaker of the House is lying to the American people, saying that it's not allowed. President Trump found $40 billion in U.S. taxpayer dollars to send to his political allies in Argentina just last week. But when it comes to feeding our own people here in the United States of America, he refuses to act. Back home in New Mexico, 1 in 5 people rely on SNAP. They aren't strangers. They're neighbors, coworkers, friends, children, people I go to church with. They're the folks we say hello to at the grocery store or at a Little League game. President Trump's refusal to release SNAP funding doesn't just impact New Mexico. States like Louisiana, where Speaker Johnson is from, are facing the same crisis. Louisiana is third on the list of constituents that will be negatively impacted. Now, I've been fortunate enough to visit several food banks across New Mexico and meet with community members who are working around the clock to make sure neighbors have something to eat. To every one of our community members who have stepped up, I want to say thank you, not just across New Mexico, but across America. I am proud to represent a community that takes care of each other when times are tough. It shouldn't have to be this way. Since the creation of SNAP, there's never been a lapse. There's never been a lapse in SNAP funding during a government shutdown. The Trump administration has the authority and the funds to keep SNAP running during this shutdown. And don't take my word for it. Look at the USDA's own guidance that they removed from their website that justifies this. Any failure to do so right now falls squarely on the Trump administration and Republicans. We could vote on this today, on this bill or one that Senator Hawley's authored as well that has many Republican colleagues that are co-sponsors to prevent a hunger crisis. This pain does not need to happen. President Trump is choosing to inflict pain on American families by holding meals hostage. That's why I'm leading this legislation to ensure no child, parent, or veteran misses a meal because of the Republican shutdown. It also says that if states, tribal governments are in a position right now to actually fund SNAP programs, that they do get reimbursed, unlike what President Trump has been threatening them that they will not. We cannot stand by and let our neighbors go hungry. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I appreciate everyone that's reached out to my office to have a conversation about this piece of legislation. I hope we can work together, we find a path forward. But I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to come together to pass this bill now, fund SNAP, fund WIC, before this hunger crisis hits our communities. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of S 3071 introduced earlier today, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Thank you. Reserving the right to object, let me just point out, if I might, that we are 29 days into a Democrat shutdown. And the senator from New Mexico was absolutely right. SNAP recipients shouldn't go without food. People should be getting paid in this country. And we tried to do that 13 times. And you voted no 13 times. This isn't a political game. These are real people's lives that we're talking about. And you all have just figured out, 29 days in, that, oh, there might be some consequences. There are people who run out of money. Yeah, we're 29 days in. And they've done their best to make sure that a lot of these programs are funded. But at some point, the government runs out of money. 13 times, people over here voted to fund SNAP. 13 times they voted to fund WIC. My aching back. Finally realized this thing has consequences. Well, you know what? What Democrats are doing here, they're making plans to keep the shutdown going. And they realize, all of a sudden, 29 days in, that this is a real consequence, real life pain for American families, something that results from their shutdown. So are they making plans to end the shutdown and reopen the government? Nope. They're going to propose a bill to fund food stamps during their shutdown. Mr. President, this request is a transparent admission The Democrats want to keep the shutdown for what? Another month? Longer? This bill is a cynical attempt to provide political cover for Democrats to allow them to carry on their government shutdown for the long term. Now, I'll point out, we did 13 short-term clean CRs when they had the majority and President Biden was in the White House. 13. They've now voted 13 times against a clean CR. I have no idea where you're coming from. The Democrat leader said that President Trump could end this with a stroke of his pen. And he's right. We passed that bill with a stroke of his pen, he'll sign it into law. And the government opens up. And SNAP beneficiaries, SNAP recipients get food assistance. But you know what else? TSA workers get paid. Air traffic controllers get paid. Border Patrol agents get paid. Troops get paid. These people here get paid who are working without pay. You want to extend that and keep that going? Give me a break. So the people who aren't going to get the benefit of what they're trying to do today, Mr. President, are all the other programs that are affected. Head Start, grants to law enforcement to fight fentanyl and hire more cops to protect communities. Rural development programs that are important in my state, Senator from New Mexico State, I assume as well, that support housing, utilities, infrastructure projects in rural communities. Small business loans, certain direct loan and emergency programs that farmers rely on. National Guard training, critical to our nation's military readiness. Veterans transition assistance as they come out of service. Veterans cemetery services. Right now, there are no headstones, memorial certificates, cemetery maintenance, programs that are at risk, rental and housing assistance, delays in processing FHA-insured loans, delays in aircraft inspections and maintenance for air traffic control equipment, people that are currently not getting paid. I mentioned some of them, but air traffic controllers, TSA officers, Capitol Police, the people who protect us in this building, NOAA employees who are tracking hurricanes and other potential weather disruptions, disasters, food inspectors, other food and drug safety officials, mine safety inspectors, people who don't have pay certainty right now, troops, Coast Guard, ICE, Border Patrol, federal law enforcement, federal federal wildland fighters, firefighters, extenders that have lapsed, telehealth and at-home care, community health centers, teaching health centers, special diabetes programs, payments for ambulances, hospital at-home services, other lapsed authorizations, CISA to prevent against cyber attacks, National Flood Insurance Program to prevent closure, on homes in flood zones. That's what you're leaving on the table. The bill at the desk takes care of all of it. Funds SNAP, funds WIC, and yes, with the stroke of the president's pen, he can sign it into law and everybody starts getting paid again. This has got to stop. Hostage taking. Now you want some political cover. How long is this going to go on? How much longer do you want to see it go on? Just out of curiosity. So you think this buys some time. You want the shutdown to go on for another month, and then we're going to have another people come down here and, well, let's carve this out or carve this out. Why don't we just open the government? I've never seen anything like this. I've been here a good amount of time. I've seen continuing resolutions and appropriations problems and funding fights and government shutdowns. I've been through a few. I've never seen anything like this. This just isn't done. You want to have a discussion about health care? Absolutely. Let's do it. Open the government. Let's do it. President will sit down with Democrats next week if you want to talk about health care. That's not what this is about. So, Mr. President, we're not going to pick winners and losers. It's time to fund everybody who's experiencing the pain from this shutdown. The Democrats really want to fund SNAP and WIC. I have a bill for them, sitting right there at the desk. Clean, nonpartisan, CR to fund SNAP, WIC, and the entire government, and all the many programs and people that the Democrat SNAP bill completely ignores. Mr. President, Democrats have spent a month now, playing with people's livelihoods because the far left wing of their party won't let them accept a clean, nonpartisan CR. If they want to prevent damage from their shutdown, they can end the shutdown. The bill's right here at the desk. So, Mr. President, I ask that the senator from New Mexico modify his request so that the Senate can proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Does the senator so modify his request?
Mr. President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President, I respect the majority leader, the Republican leader. I see some of his staff in the room as well, people that I've worked with. They know when I work with them and when others don't. But I understand the words that were being used today to spin an argument as to why there should be justification for 40 million people to go hungry. You know, Mr. President, I get in trouble sometimes because I use language from that little farm that I still call home. But I've learned the rules of decorum on this Senate floor, so I won't use them today. But some of the lessons my father taught me early in my life, even after I was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, when he'd leave a shovel by the front door when I'd go home on a weekend, and he'd leave my rubber boots there to make sure I'd put them on, because we're going to go clean the barn. We raise cattle, we raise sheep, we raise all kinds of animals, and after those animals eat, they make something. Some of us use it to fertilize our land, some people call it manure. I won't refer to it as the language that I usually call it when I'm not on the Senate floor. I also taught it's important to tell people the truth and be honest with the American people. What the good leader left out when he was talking about the number of votes that Republicans voted on under a Democratic president, under a Democratic majority in the Senate and in the House, was that there was not a shutdown. We negotiated. People came to meetings. As a matter of fact, a lot of my Democratic constituents told me Democrats gave way too much to those Republicans when you were in the majority. Well, when you have to negotiate, when you hold power, when you're in the majority, you meet people. You pull them in. You know how, folks, you know where my office is. You all have heard me talk about the late Governor Bruce King, cattle farmer out in New Mexico. He used to tell us when people can't figure out what's going on, you lock them up in a barn and you don't let them out until they figure out how to get along. Well, if we don't got a barn, maybe they've got an office around here to sit some people. And there's a White House. It's easy to get in. There's a big hole in it. Invite some people over there to sit down. President Trump said not long ago that if there's a shutdown, it's up to presidents to bring people together to prevent it. And if there's a shutdown, it does not bode well for the President of the United States of America. He's absolutely right. It's not just a Democratic bill to fund SNAP that's on the floor today. There's a pending bill that has been introduced into the United States Senate that has 11 Republicans that are co-signers, including the Republican who authored it, a colleague out of Missouri. He does not want his folks to go hungry, and he's saying, enough of this nonsense. Let's have a bill on the floor. Give him a UC. If you don't want to give the Democratic bill a unanimous consent, give the Republican-authored bill the unanimous consent. I'm a co-sponsor of that one, too, because I'm willing to work with folks. You all know that. You all know that. Look, days before Americans start receiving notices that healthcare premiums are about to skyrocket as the Trump administration moves to cut off SNAP benefits, this dysfunction is what the American people have come to expect from Republican majorities in the Congress and the White House. And look, I appreciate my colleagues saying the blame is on our side of the aisle. We're in the majority. Oh, not yet. Maybe soon. We're in the minority. With power comes responsibility. Republicans are in the majority in the Senate. Fact. Republicans are in the majority in the House of Representatives. Fact. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is a Republican. Fact. Cannot be refuted. They're in charge. The American people know that. So, Mr. President, just as a reminder, SNAP has never not been funded when there have been shutdowns in the past, including President Donald Trump's first term. And even under President Trump's second term, he tapped $1 billion of the $6 billion to pay for staff to administer SNAP. They did it. Now they want to take down policy from a website that says that they can justify doing this, showing the law. That's the nonsense. That's the garbage the American people are tired of, the political this, the political jostling, all of that. We got people that are going to go hungry. This has never happened before, y'all. There's a better way to do this. So, Mr. President, in response to the request from the Majority Leader, the Republican leader, on behalf of constituents from South Dakota, constituents from New Mexico that do not, so that I'm clear, sometimes people confuse my New Mexico accent, that do not want to see their health premiums double and triple and bankrupt them, and some people that can't afford to get insurance won't be as lucky as me, where I survived a stroke 3 years ago. By the way, this is what a stroke survivor looks like. If you get access to a doctor, you don't have to worry about going bankrupt because you can't pay the bills. This is what you can look like. You can get better. And in America, we should strive for that. So again, on behalf of constituents from South Dakota that do not want to see health premiums double and triple, on behalf of my New Mexico constituents that do not want to see health premiums double or triple, I will not modify my request.
The objection to the modification is heard.
Mr. President.
Is there an objection to the original request?
Mr. President,
the Majority Leader.
I regret the fact that the Senator from New Mexico and his Democrat colleagues are unwilling to modify his request to include keeping the government open. And I would say, rhetorical question to my colleague from New Mexico, if the government reopens, do SNAP beneficiaries get paid? Yeah, right? So do WIC beneficiaries. Veterans, low-income elderly people, people who need this assistance. It's not like you're doing anything here that isn't accomplished by reopening the government and paying everybody else. And you guys know that. There are a lot of people today who aren't getting paid. Last Friday, federal employees didn't get paid for the first time. Yesterday, air traffic controllers didn't get paid for the first time. And it only worsens over time. And so I would be more than willing, and have said this multiple times, as you all know, to sit down, get a group together, talk about health care. We think that Obamacare, and particularly the enhanced subsidies, are desperately in need of reform. There's no income cap. There's no asset test. People are making $500,000 to $600,000 a year and getting subsidies from the federal government for their health care. There are $0 premiums There are millions of Americans who don't even know they have coverage. Because the way that program is structured, the payments go directly to the insurance companies. So insurance companies are out there auto-enrolling people and making bank. A lot of people don't even know that they have insurance coverage. So this program is desperately in need of reform. The waste, fraud, and abuse in this program is kind of gotten to an epic level, because if you look at what's happened since 2013 when the exchanges went online, insurance premiums in the individual marketplace on the exchanges have gone up 221%. I mean, you tell me any place else in the economy that goes up 221% in that amount of time. It's going up double digits every year. In the employer market, it would be 6 to 7%. So it's a program that's fundamentally in need of change and reform. It's unsustainable and it's unaffordable. And to give you an example of that, doing the very thing you're talking about, which is included in your bill, which was offered as an alternative to the Republican proposal, the clean Republican proposal that simply opens the government, the proposal included in your bill is a $400 billion item, cost to the taxpayers. And so we're willing to sit down and see, and I've said on behalf of the President as well, that he's willing to sit down and talk about how we can reform and make health care in this country more affordable and less inflationary. Because this program is inflationary. It's going up every year. Now, you all are going to blame the doing away with the Biden bonus payments in that legislation for the increase. But the fact of the matter is that'll be a very small part of that because of the way the program is structured in the first place. There is no incentive to constrain or control costs. So let's have that conversation. I've said that. We can sit down and do it. But as many of you have said, and there are quotes out there from all of you, in previous shutdowns or when there's fights over a continuing resolution, that you can't negotiate when you have a gun to your head. The Democrat leader said that. And so let's get beyond this silliness and fund the government and make sure that SNAP recipients and WIC recipients and recipients of other government programs, which I mentioned, and it's a long list, which isn't covered by your bill, by the way, that those people and those programs also get taken care of. We have a chance to do that. And we actually have a chance, I think, to have a normal appropriations process where we move bills across the floor, open them up to the amendment process, something that hasn't been done here in a while. We can do that. I want to start now. But it starts when we open up the government. So let's just do what normal people would do. And Senator from New Mexico is right. I represent a lot of hardworking Americans, farmers, ranchers, small business people, school teachers, educators. My dad, mom were educators. And I just think that there are a lot of people out there who look at this and say, this doesn't make any sense to me. If they want to talk about health care, then let's do that. But why take the federal government hostage and every federal employee, including everybody in this room that's not getting paid, that isn't covered by the bill that you're putting forward? The bill that does cover everybody is the one right there, which we've now voted on 13 times. Just a few. A few of you decide to vote differently. Let's get on appropriations bills, start funding the government the old-fashioned way. I'm for that. I think everybody over here is up for that. I know the chair of our Appropriations Committee, Susan Collins, and most of the appropriators on the committee have worked together in a constructive way, in a bipartisan way, to get bills to the floor that we can consider. But so far, everything we've tried to do here, at least in the last few weeks, have been blocked, including get on the defense appropriations bill and go into conference on 3 bills we've already passed. So, Mr. President, as much as I appreciate what the senator from New Mexico is trying to do here, and I don't question his intentions, I think he is sincere, but I also think that this is missing the larger point here, and that is this government is closed. And what you're trying to do and accomplish here is make it harder, not easier, to get the government opened up again and to make sure everybody else gets paid. So, Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and further purposes.
Mr. President, Democrats are grasping at straws these days. The other day, the Democrat leader came to the floor and tried to reboot the notion that the clean CR sitting before us here in the Senate is a partisan CR. Yep. Apparently a bill with no partisan add-ons, strictly a bill to fund the government, is a partisan bill. Only in Democrat land, Mr. President. Democrat leader, of course, continues to try to push this ludicrous narrative that Republicans or President Trump shut down the government. That's right. The party that demanded nothing and put forward a clean, nonpartisan bill is the party that shut down the government. And the party that demanded $1.5 trillion to keep the government open until Friday, until Halloween. That's what their bill will do. $1.5 trillion in new spending to keep the federal government open until Friday. I wonder if Democrats have seen some of the recent headlines, like this one. And I quote, benefits cliff amps up pressure on Senate Democrats, end quote, and, quote, largest federal workers union calls for an end to the shutdown, putting pressure on Democrats, end quote. Putting pressure on Democrats, Mr. President, not Republicans. Now, why? Because Republicans are ready to reopen the government today. And we're not demanding a single thing in exchange. It's the Democrats who are refusing. In fact, the Democrats' latest ploy is, get this, moral outrage that the president isn't stepping in to save Democrats from the consequences of their actions. That's right. Democrats are outraged that they are coming face to face with the consequences of their decision to shut down the government. And so they're flailing around blaming President Trump for not stepping in to somehow save the SNAP program from running out of money to pay benefits. Yeah, that's right, Mr. President. The very same people who were content to let the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, more commonly known as WIC, run dry are now positioning themselves as crusaders for nutrition benefits. President Trump did step in to save Democrats from themselves on WIC. He somehow managed to find money to cover the program for the time being. But there is a limit to what he can do. That's kind of the reason we like to, have the government open. But apparently Democrats are still not willing to contemplate allowing the government to function, because the SNAP bill that they tried to use yesterday was not just a cynical political ploy to insulate themselves from the consequences of their own actions. It was also a disturbing signal. The Democrats are ready to continue this shutdown, I guess forever. Do Democrats have any end date in sight? Are there any consequences bad enough to get Democrats to reopen the government again? Because things are getting pretty serious here, Mr. President. The shutdown had consequences from day one. But now, 30 days in, the consequences are really stonewalling. Here are some headlines I think, that describes the situation. Government shutdown could lead to $14 billion in lost GDP, the Congressional Budget Office reports. Shutdown could close Head Start programs this week, jeopardizing child care. Shutdown crushes small business owners as losses hit billions. Industry leaders beg Congress for clean CR. Ongoing government shutdown threatens holiday travel. National Guard training grinds to halt amid shutdown with no pay in sight. U.S. government shutdown, 60,000 aviation safety staff face financial strain as crisis deepens. Largest federal workers union calls for clean bill to end shutdown. Those, Mr. President, are just a sampling of the headlines out there, and they represent the consequences as the Democrat shutdown accelerates. So when will the Democrats put an end to this, Mr. President? When the economy is in ruins? When federal workers have lost their homes? When housing assistance and small business loans and Head Start and National Guard training are distant memories? I hope the pain of the American people is worth the plaudits the Democrats are getting from their liberal base. Mr. President, I don't know if listing out the consequences of Democrat shutdown moves any Democrats anymore. I really don't. In fact, more than one member of their party, way more than one member of their party, has described using the pain of the American people as leverage. I'll give you an example of some of the things that they've been saying. Starting with the Democrat leader, every day gets better for us. The whip, the number 2 position among House Democrats, says there will be families that are going to suffer, but it was one of the few times, or the few leverage times that we have. Senator from New Mexico, paying our troops gives the president more leverage. That's a really good reason not to pay the troops, right? Senator from Arizona asked about it, said, hey, I just go back and shut it down again. Senator from Delaware, frankly, this is our only moment of leverage, and although a very pleasant tool to use, very unpleasant tool to use. Yeah, it's unpleasant, all right, if you're a worker who's lost their jobs not getting paid. And of course, the senator from Vermont, you reopen the government, we lose our leverage. It's all about leverage. That's what they're making it all about, leverage. So the question is, when are American people going to matter more than their leverage, Mr. President? If there are any Democrats out there who can still see beyond the demands of their far-left base, if there are any Democrats who care about the damage that this shutdown is doing, then I have a bill right there at the desk. A clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution to fund WIC, SNAP, troop pay, air traffic controller pay, farm programs, housing assistance, our national defense, and every single other government priority. We just need 5 Democrats to show some courage and join the 3 Democrats who are already with us, and we can get this government open. That's all it takes, Mr. President. Everybody knows that in the Senate it takes 60 votes to do anything. And Democrats come down here and consistently say, well, the Republicans have control of the Senate, the House, the White House. And the Republicans in the House, the Senate, and the White House are all agreed. Open up the government. But you can't do that in the Senate unless you have 60 votes, meaning we have to have a few Democrats. We have a few already. We need 5 Democrats with a backbone. 5 Democrats with the courage to take on that far-left base and say we care more about the lives of the American people than about gaining some political leverage. This takes five, Mr. President. Enough is enough. I urge my Democrat colleagues to agree to reopen the federal government and to do it today. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of quorum.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, it's November. November. It's been 5 weeks since Democrats shut down the government. And once again, we start this week by asking, is this the week that Democrats end their shutdown? Mr. President, I've said it before that there are no winners in a government shutdown. There are no winners, but there are plenty of losers. Chief among them is the American people. As the senior Democrat from Virginia said just last year, and I quote, "Shutdowns aren't victimless crimes," end quote. And after 5 weeks, Mr. President, the victims of the Democrat shutdown are starting to pile up. Military families have turned to food banks in significant numbers. And they're not the only ones. Food banks in this area and around the country have seen an influx of federal workers who are missing paychecks due to the shutdown. And things are set to get much worse with SNAP running on limited emergency funds and its future uncertain. Thanks to Democrats, millions more Americans, millions, Mr. President, are now at risk of going hungry. And yet the Democrat shutdown marches on. And of course, letting Americans go hungry is just the beginning. Thanks to Democrats, Head Start programs are beginning to close. Housing assistance programs are at risk. Seniors and people in rural areas can't access telehealth services. National Guard training is on hold. Veterans programs are on pause. I'm sorry to say I could go on. Actually, I could go on for a while. Shutdowns have consequences, and the pain is being felt around the country. Mr. President, last week it seemed that Democrats were beginning to acknowledge that their shutdown is having consequences. We even heard Democrats express concern that Americans were suffering. But when they were given the chance to end all of that suffering, the vast majority of Democrats in this body were perfectly willing to prolong the shutdown and the American people's pain. The vast majority of Democrats voted once again against a clean continuing resolution, the only bill on offer that could end all this suffering literally in a matter of hours. It is the only bill in the Senate that would fix every single issue I just mentioned. It would pay our troops, fund SNAP, Head Start, veterans programs, pay our staffers. 3 Democrat senators already support that clean continuing resolution, Mr. President. And the Democrat from Maine who supported the clean CR in the House said, and I quote, "There's a lot of important work to be done in Congress, none of which will be any easier if Mainers are suffering the harms of a government shutdown," end quote.
The Teamsters Union and the American Federation of Government Employees, more traditionally allies of Democrats, to be frank, have called for Congress to spare the American people further pain and to pass the clean continuing resolution. And they're far from the only ones. Mr. President, it should not be this hard for a handful of Democrats to support a clean bill that simply reopens the government. It's a very straightforward proposition. It's a 24-page bill sitting right here at the Senate desk. Not a single new Republican policy, no partisan policy writers, nothing that Democrats haven't supported before on numerous occasions. It just reopens the government. And it's just 5 Democrat votes away from being sent to the President, who would sign it literally in a matter of hours. This bill is also the quickest way to get the two discussions, I should say, about health care. That is, if Democrats are serious about solving the Obamacare problem and not just interested in using it as a political issue. As I've said more times than I can count, Republicans are more than willing to have a health care discussion with Democrats. In fact, had Democrats voted to reopen the government last week, President Trump would be meeting with them this week. Unlike Democrats who want to continue papering over the unaffordability of Obamacare forevermore, Republicans have ideas for actually lowering health care costs. And lowering costs not just for Americans on Obamacare, but also for seniors, vulnerable Americans, and the majority of Americans who get their health care through their employers. And so we're ready and willing to have that discussion. But first, Democrats need to stop playing politics with people's lives and reopen the government. Mr. President, airline travel is snarled. Small businesses are suffering. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are working without pay. And now, 40 million Americans in need are at risk of losing their food stamps. So the question, Mr. President, is how long are Democrats going to continue this? Another month? 2? 3? How much suffering is enough for Democrats? Mr. President, the bill's sitting right there. We voted on it 14 times already. We'll get that opportunity to vote on it a 15th time tomorrow. And for the sake of the American people, let's hope that at least some Democrats can see their way to ending this and ending it soon. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop.
An act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, like many Americans, I was saddened to learn this morning of the death of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Dick was a lifelong public servant who believed very deeply in our country and brought his considerable knowledge and intelligence to its service. As Secretary of Defense and later as Vice President, he played a key role in shaping policy on many of the most consequential issues of his day. He was also an avid outdoorsman and fly fisherman who loved spending time in the mountains of his home state. I enjoyed having him in South Dakota and showing off some of what our state has to offer. Mr. President, my thoughts and prayers today are with his wife Lynn, with his 2 beloved daughters, and with his 7 grandchildren. Mr. President, quote, "Every day gets better for us," end quote. Those were the words of the Democrat leader a week into this shutdown, reflecting on the supposed benefits, political benefits for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I guess it's nice that every day is getting better for Senate Democrats, because it sure isn't getting better for anyone else. We're in the 6th week of the Democrat shutdown, Mr. President. That's right, the 6th week. And Democrats' victims are everywhere. Let's just go through a few headlines. These are some headlines from newspapers and news outlets around the country. Some Head Start preschools shudder as government shutdown continues. Shutdown crushes small business owners as losses hits billions. Industry leaders beg Congress for a clean CR. Everyone is worried. Dallas SNAP recipients navigate uncertainty and dwindling funds. That's a Democrat shutdown at work, Mr. President. Here's another headline. After a month of the shutdown, workers face mounting bills, car repossessions. And the subhead to that article said this: finances are becoming dire for the more than 750,000 government workers who've been going without pay now for a full month. Here's some more headlines, Mr. President. Flight delays pile up as government shutdown enters 2nd month. Worst weekend for air traffic controller staffing since the start of the shutdown. Flight delays could worsen as government shutdown drags on. Could worsen, Mr. President. And we're entering one of the busiest travel seasons of the year with people making holiday plans with their families. Mr. President, there are a lot more headlines where those came from. People are suffering, all because Democrats can't bring themselves to accept a clean, nonpartisan funding bill. Mr. President, the list of people begging Democrats to pass a clean government funding extension is long, and it's growing longer. The Teamsters Union, the New York City Steamfitters Union, the American Federation of Government Employees, multiple airline pilot unions, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, business organizations like the National Restaurant Association. And Mr. President, I could go on. All of these organizations are begging Democrats to take yes for an answer and support a clean, nonpartisan bill, the one sitting right there at the desk that is available to be picked up and passed today, sent to the President, signed into law, and the government opens. But Democrats are recalcitrant. Mr. President, for a party that claims to represent working people, it is striking to me how very little Democrats seem to care about working people during this shutdown. The senior Democrat from Vermont published an op-ed this weekend in which he calls for this shutdown to keep going forever, as far as I can tell. Of course, he attempts to claim that Democrats are doing this for working people. To which I say, Mr. President, give me a break. Democrats are injuring working people with their shutdown. Maybe Democrats have no idea what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck like so many Americans, including many government employees. But let me just tell them there are a whole lot of working people out there who can't afford to miss a single paycheck, much less the multiple paychecks that they've now missed thanks to the Senate Democrats. And beyond the people Democrats have directly deprived of paychecks, there are a lot of other people whose livelihood is being affected by this shutdown, like small business owners and employees whose income has declined because the federal workers who usually patronize their businesses are out of work. There's really nothing Democrats can do to make that right. But they can at least make sure that they don't extend the pain that people are experiencing. Later today, we're going to vote once again on a clean, nonpartisan funding extension, the one we voted on 14 times already, the one sitting right at the desk, Mr. President, that would open up this government today and make sure that all of those Americans will get paid. We just need 5 Democrats to join the 3 who are already voting with us, and we could end all this pain and reopen the government. That's all it takes, Mr. President. 5 Democrats. Everybody knows, follows our government in this process, that in the Senate, it takes a supermajority. It takes 60 votes to do virtually anything. So we need help. We need help from some Democrats with a backbone who are courageous enough to take on their left-wing base and do the right thing for the American people. And I do realize, Mr. President, the Democrats are facing tremendous pressure from the far left wing of their party, which is apparently content to see working people suffer as long as Democrats make a good show of opposing President Trump. But I hope that there are at least those 5 Democrats out there who will look at the pain that people are experiencing and will say, enough is enough. We're in the 6th week now, Mr. President, of this shutdown. The 6th week. While every day may be getting better for Senate Democrats, thanks to Senate Democrats, every day is getting worse for the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President, can this be over now? Have the American people suffered enough? Or do Democrats need more? Democrats have snarled air traffic, they've damaged small businesses, they've left federal workers in line at food banks, they've jeopardized food assistance. Food assistance, Mr. President, for 40 million Americans. Are they satisfied now? Or does the far left want more? Surely Democrats have hit enough milestones. The election is over. Democrats now have the extremely dubious honor of being responsible for the longest government shutdown in American history. So the question is, Mr. President, can the American people get a break now? Democrats should be embarrassed. Embarrassed that federal workers are lining up at food banks and missing bills and in danger of losing homes or cars because Democrats can't summon enough members to support a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution. That's right, Mr. President, a clean, nonpartisan funding bill sitting right here at the Senate desk. We've not asked Democrats to support a single new Republican policy. We haven't asked them to support a single partisan policy rider. We simply asked them to extend current funding levels for a few weeks so that we could have time to do bipartisan work on appropriations bills. The Democrats couldn't take yes for an answer. And on the subject of appropriations, Mr. President, if any Democrats cherish the faintest hope of still funding the government through a full-year appropriations process, a process that they've displayed, or I should say delayed, for 5 weeks and counting, they should vote for the clean, nonpartisan CR today. Mr. President, I realize that Democrats have been under a lot of pressure from their far-left base to keep the shutdown going. And I assume that it was pressure from Democrats' far-left base that saw the Democrat leader flip his position on shutdowns 180 degrees in the space of just 6 months. And I realize that there are a number of Democrats in the Senate who are not just yielding to pressure from the far left, but are themselves members of the far left and are happy to continue the shutdown forever, if it means somehow sticking it, they think, to President Trump. But I'm hoping there are still Democrats out there who can see beyond the political extremism of their leftist base. And I hope there are some Democrats who can take an honest look at the widespread damage that their shutdown is doing and say enough is enough. Thanksgiving is rapidly approaching. Parents are starting to think about what they're going to put under the tree. Do Democrats still want federal employees lining up at food banks at Thanksgiving? At Christmas? And on the topic of the holidays, it's an open question whether people will be able to spend it with their families this year if the shutdown continues. Air traffic has been snarled for weeks as a result of Democrat shutdown, and things are getting worse. The Transportation Secretary just announced yesterday that the government may be forced to close parts of our airspace if the shutdown continues into next week. Close airspace, Mr. President. Think about that. And I could go on. I could talk about the unions asking Democrats to end this shutdown and support a clean continuing resolution. I could talk about the business organizations making the same request. I could read the headlines about Head Start preschools closing and SNAP recipients who are worried about their benefits and National Guard units who aren't training, and on and on. Every single thing as a result of Democrats' decision to shut down the government more than 5 weeks ago. But surely, Mr. President, surely, there are at least some Democrat senators who can see this for themselves. See this for themselves and realize it is past time to end this before the damage gets even worse. Mr. President, it's day 36 of Democrats' shutdown. Day 36. How much longer are Democrats going to make the American people suffer? Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Republican Leader.
Senate and quorum call.
Yes.
I would ask unanimous consent the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, we are 37 days into an entirely avoidable government shutdown. And I say avoidable, Mr. President, because it was. Democrats instigated this shutdown by rejecting a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution. Republicans weren't asking them to swallow a bunch of new conservative policies. There isn't a single partisan policy in the bill. And yet Democrats couldn't bring themselves to take yes for an answer. Democrats, of course, have claimed their decision to shut down the government's about health care. They want Republicans to bail out their Obamacare mess. And as I've said probably 1,000 times now, Mr. President, Republicans are 100% willing to sit down and talk about the mess that Democrats have created. We're just not going to have that conversation while Democrats are holding the federal government hostage. That was our position in September. That was our position in October. And yes, it's still our position in November. We're just waiting for Democrats to take yes for an answer. Mr. President, I do know that Democrats have been under a lot of pressure from the far left. The far left pushed them to shut down the government. And the far left has pushed them to keep it shut down. As one House Democrat told Axios yesterday, and I quote, "There would be hell to pay if Senate Democrats don't let events play out," end quote. There would be hell to pay if Senate Democrats don't let events play out. That quote from a House Democrat just yesterday. Well, Mr. President, what events need to play out? What more needs to happen for the far left to be satisfied? The pain this shutdown has caused is only getting worse. 40 million Americans who rely on food assistance programs are now at risk of going hungry without a resolution to the shutdown. I'm sure these Americans are doing everything in their power to feed their families, but they can't do that forever. Federal workers have now gone without pay for more than a month, including the people in this building. Will the far left not be satisfied until federal workers and military families are getting their Thanksgiving dinner from a food bank? Because that's where we're headed. And then, Mr. President, there's air travel. Yesterday, the Transportation Secretary announced that as a matter of safety, the Department of Transportation is requiring mandatory reduction in air traffic starting tomorrow because of shutdown staffing issues. That means widespread flight cancellations, supply chain issues, hundreds of thousands of passengers dealing with disruptions to travel every day. The impact this will have will be immense. And all of it because Democrats cannot bring themselves to accept a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution, something that happened 13 times when they had the majority and President Biden was in the White House. So I ask the question again, Mr. President, what more do Democrats need? They got their chairs at the left-wing No Kings rally. They kept their base satisfied through the fall campaigns and Election Day. And as of Tuesday, they have the extremely dubious honor of instigating the longest and most severe government shutdown in history. How much more do Americans have to endure before Democrats are satisfied? Mr. President, the Democrat leader said yesterday that every day gets better for Democrats. The number 2 Democrat in the House has said that the American people's suffering takes a back seat to Democrats' precious leverage. And the senior senator from Vermont, a leading voice on the left, wrote an op-ed over the weekend calling for Democrats to keep the government shut down forever, as far as I can tell. Mr. President, I hope that's not where most Democrats are. I hope at least a few Democrats can see that this can't go on any longer. People are suffering, and it's getting worse every day. A furloughed federal employee, a mother of 5 in Maryland, told the New York Times last week, and I quote, "I don't know how to get the mortgage paid," end quote. Federal workers are taking on second jobs to make ends meet. Food banks across the country are overwhelmed. And American families are looking to the holiday season with apprehension. Mr. President, Democrats have a choice to make. Are they going to continue to bow to pressure from voices on the far left telling them to keep up their opposition? Or are they going to stop the American people's suffering and end this shutdown? I hope enough of them are willing to do the right thing. And I hope they do it soon. The American people can't wait for events to play out. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Alsterbrooks.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, yesterday we finally heard Democrats entertain the notion of reopening the government. It only took them 38 days. Why in the days before, progressives were urging Democrats to prolong the shutdown in perpetuity? One House Democrat said, and I quote, "There would be hell to pay if Senate Democrats don't let events play out," end quote. And so I'm glad to see Democrats, after 38 days, back down from the maximalist and frankly insane position they've held since September. The Democrat leader's proposal is a non-starter for for the Republican majority. The Democrat leader wants to believe that this is a, quote, simple proposal, that it is some sort of compromise, but it is not. He's talking about throwing tens of billions more taxpayer dollars at a program that even Democrats admit has failed to lower health care costs. The American people are tired of Washington taking their hard-earned money and spending it on costly government programs that fail to follow through on their promises. Of course, that's what Democrats have been doing for years with Obamacare. They passed Obamacare 15 years ago without a single Republican vote. And in that time, Democrats' signature health care law has failed to do what Democrats promised. If you like your health insurance, you can keep it. Not true. If you like your doctor, you can keep him or her. Not true. Premium costs will go down. Not true. And actually, the opposite is true. They keep going up. Obamacare drove premium prices higher. So in 2021, in the Democrats' American Rescue Plan Act, a bill best known for setting off a years-long inflation crisis, Democrats created these Biden bonuses, further papering over the higher premium costs under Obamacare with bigger taxpayer subsidies. Again, they did that without a single Republican vote. And then in another partisan bill in 2022, they extended the subsidies through the end of this year. Democrats chose the expiration date. They created this cliff. And now they want to blame Republicans for their mess. Give me a break, Mr. President. Republicans are not about to further burden taxpayers by blindly extending a flawed program. The Democrats' proposal is just more of the same, masking rising premiums and padding insurance companies' profits with more taxpayer dollars. The Democrat leader's proposal is a non-starter. There's still only one path out. It's a clean funding extension. The House has already passed a clean funding extension. The President supports one and would sign it into law immediately. We're only a handful of votes away from passing one right here in the Senate, Mr. President, a bill that has been sitting at the desk now for 38 days. We reopen, and then we can start talking about addressing the health care mess that Democrats created. Mr. President, I know that Democrats know this. Just yesterday, the Democrat whip came to the floor to say something that I've been waiting for a Democrat to say for a long time. He said that the first thing we need to do is reopen the government, then address the cost of health care and advance appropriations bills. I've been saying that for about 6 weeks now. And I think that's exactly what we need to do today. And so I hope the Democrat whip and others in his caucus will join the 3 Democrats who have been supporting a clean continuing resolution, the only bill that can actually end the shutdown. Mr. President, I'm glad to see that after 38 days, Democrats are finally warming up to the idea that their shutdown can't go on forever. And I urge my colleagues to support a clean continuing resolution so we can start a real discussion to address their health care mess, get back to the regular appropriations process, and above all, finally provide relief to the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.